Good afternoon and welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina as we continue the hearing in docket number 2023-9-E. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, Commissioner Caston, Chair Belser, and with us virtually we have Commissioner Irvin. We are continuing with the second panel. I think we're on commissioner questions. Commissioner Carol Lee Williams.
Thank you. Hope you all are doing well this afternoon. At least we can't see the rain that's out there. Mr. Neely, I want to give you another chance to talk about the appropriateness or the reasonableness of the cap of 300 megawatts a year.
Yeah, so
if you feel like you covered it, you can tell me that, but if there's more you want to say.
Okay, well, I think I've said all that I can say. This is a planning process. We want the plans to be reasonable and make sense, and the annual limit gets rid of some of the lumpiness, and we think it's appropriate. We're not trying to squash anybody's solar project. That's not what that's about. It's about creating plans that are reasonable, that we can put forth with good conscience to the commission.
I like the lumpiness. I've done a lot of plans over the years, and I understand what you mean about that. Or getting rid of it as a goal. Is the 300 megawatts in any way a ratio? Can it be looked at as a ratio to the desk load?
Ratio to what?
To your load, your overall load?
Yes. In fact, that's just a way of indicating whether that's a reasonable size limit based on the size of our system. And so that's why in my testimony I showed what Duke's limit is. They're like 6 times larger than we are. I showed what the Southern Company limit is. They're about 6 times larger than us. So that's just an indication that that's a reasonable amount of solar to being added each year in the resource plan. There again, if we went out for an RFP and we needed 600 megawatts of solar, we wouldn't say, oh, we can't take but 300. That's not what that is doing.
So as the load increases, would the maximum go up?
Potentially, but if the, it'd have to be quite a big change in load, because we don't, we're about 5,000 megawatts out pretty far into the future.
Would you talk a little bit about the risk of having more solar given the load that you have, just for test, to have it in the record?
If we were to increase the limit and allow more solar, if we could integrate that much solar, then there wouldn't be an issue with risk. The solar, you'll see it kind of gets added in step with storage resources. You kind of need both, but you also need dispatchable resources, because solar is intermittent. You don't have it all the time. You don't have it at all at night. Storage is energy limited, so you got energy limited and intermittent resources, so you need to balance that with some dispatchable resources to keep the system reliable. In particular, if you retire Williams, because of the very complex transmission issues around the Charleston area, the 19 interconnections with Santee Cooper, all of those things play into the fact that you need a resource that you can put online and let it generate for days, even weeks, while the transmission system is being maintained. So I don't know that I would say that there's a risk of too much solar. if we can integrate it, then it wouldn't be risky.
And when you talked about storage as energy limited, is that based on the size of the storage?
Yes. So for a 4-hour, 100 megawatt storage system, you can get 400 megawatts, 400 megawatt hours out of it, and then it's discharged, and you can't get any more out of it till you charge it up again. So that's the limitation. That's the energy limited nature of it.
You may have covered this before, but how did you devise the 50-50 ratio?
It's not a scientific method. It's just one of those inputs that we felt that this is an appropriate balance between utility-owned solar and PPA solar. Even though we've got that annual limit, the model actually ends up building twice as much PPA solar as it does utility-owned solar based on the price of the difference in price. I can give you those numbers if you're interested, but I don't have them right here in front of me. About 3,600 megawatts of PPA solar and about 1,500 megawatts of utility-owned solar. There again, that's a plan. That shows the direction the company's going. We're not locking ourselves into those megawatts. That's not what what an IRP does. It's not locking you into a specific plan. It's showing the direction of the company. This is the direction we're going. These are the action items that we need to pursue to get to where we have the system that we need in the future. So those things will be changing.
And is the 50-50 ratio, is that embraced by other utilities in the Southeast?
Yes, and that's consistent with what Dominion Virginia uses. In fact, in their plan, their commission requires a 50-50 split between PPA and utility-owned solar.
And I think the last question, or kind of the last questions on this, are you confident at this point in Dominion's ability to achieve its 50%? Understanding it's for planning purposes, but
Yeah, we certainly could. We certainly wouldn't have any trouble building the 1,500 megawatts of solar that are our piece between now and 2050. So that wouldn't be a difficult lift for us to build that much solar between now, over the next 27 years.
Mr. Stinslet has made recommendations for more solar. Does that put the system reliability at risk? And if so, how?
The additional solar is not putting the system at risk. The risk is in trying to replace Williams with just solar and storage,
Okay.
because the needs in the low country, the transmission issues, that's where his plan is risky. Not because it's adding so much solar and storage, it's because it doesn't add a dispatchable resource to replace Williams with.
Got a really easy question. I think it's still for you, Mr. Neely. And that is, how did the reference label come to be?
That's a good question. I don't think I have an answer for that, but it uses the load forecast, the base load forecast, the base fuel assumptions, the base CO2 assumptions, and the base DSM assumptions. So it's like using all the expected forecasts that we use in the model. It just seemed to make sense to call it the reference plan. It could have been given another name, the base plan.
Right. I think to a certain extent, some of our questions may help you figure out how challenging it is to read simple words like reference and go, okay, does that mean more than I think it means?
Yeah, if you have a suggestion, we'd be glad to hear your suggestion.
This one you're expecting. How long is the useful functional life of a shared resource plan? Of the shared resource
Yeah,
plan?
combined cycle plants typically last 40 to 50 years. Now, unlike some other resource, you can always upgrade and replace parts, and you can make a power plant last a long time. You could go out 75 years, but 40 to 50 years is a reasonable lifetime for a combined cycle plant.
And is its least cost life potentially shorter than its functional life?
Yeah, I've never heard anybody refer to a least cost life. So,
I'm trying to make a connection between the IRP and looking at lowest cost
okay.
and thinking that there's a cost to keep it in service. And clearly you just talked about some of those going from 40 to 50 to 75 years. So I'm just asking if there comes a point where in the 40 to 50 years, whether there's a point where it becomes more expensive to operate than other options that are out there.
Yeah, and I think that's true for all power plants. At some point, you can't even get the replacement parts, and so it becomes very expensive to continue to maintain and operate those plants. I don't know what that point would be. It's not a, I can't go to a graph and say, okay, this is where you hit that point. It's probably different for every power plant, kind of like if you owned an automobile. And, you've got to do maintenance. And if you're doing routine maintenance, you keep the car, you could keep driving it for a long time. But once you get to the point where it needs a new engine, it needs a new transmission, those kind of things, you think, all right, the cost of maintaining this is not worth the cost of keeping it. Well, it's a similar kind of things with power plants. Routine maintenance, we know what those are, but you can get to a point where the cost of maintaining is not worth the cost of keeping the plant, and it's time to retire it at that time.
And does that typically happen beyond that 40 to 50 year span, or could it happen in that earlier span?
It could happen anytime, but that 40 to 50 years, assuming that you do normal maintenance, and you should be able to get that kind of lifetime out of a combined cycle plant.
Okay. Mr. Wintemantle. On page 6 of your direct testimony, you provide a description of the sensitivity analysis for the reserve margin study.
Yes, I see that.
And how does the model account for scenarios similar to Winter Storm Elliott that resulted in no power being able to be purchased from neighboring utilities? Is that at all similar to the island scenario?
I would actually say that type of scenario is in the base case as well. It's certainly in the island scenario because there's always no power available in the model from neighboring utilities. That one I see more as an academic exercise. It's not reality. That says that any time of year we can't get market purchases. But the base case, because we model weather back to 1980, there's some early in those 1980s. There's temperatures that have been below what we've seen in the last 5 or 10 years. And so those scenarios would represent a similar type Elliott scenario. So the model is run for that. And there would be scenarios in that where everyone, including Dominion, is out of power. And that really is what triggers the 1 day and 10-year look. We're targeting our reserve margin will never ensure that we'll never have a firm load shed event. Its expectation is once in 10 years, and you'll see that most of those events occur in those extreme cold temperatures. So it is in the base case as well. There are iterations simulated where there's no power from neighboring systems.
Is looking back 43 years a magical time frame?
So it's a little bit magical for us because that's when the data becomes pretty clean from a temperature standpoint for the weather stations we're looking at. We have looked, because there are minimum records. It may not be hourly 8760 yearly information, but we do have yearly records that go back further. And we've looked at that before. In the 40-year period, at least in the Carolinas, is pretty representative of even a 100-year period. So we're pretty comfortable with the 43 years, but you're right. The 1980 is driven by the NOAA available data being cleaner and more trustworthy, I guess.
If you observed trends that the early 80s cold, because that looked like that was like 4 years in a row. If you observed that trends were shifting away from that and that was becoming an anomaly, would you drop those early years?
I think, we do see trends from an average temperature perspective. I think those trends are fairly clear if I take the average of the entire year. I struggle to see the trends on these anomaly cold extreme periods. So I would be very hesitant from a reliability standpoint to remove those years. For instance, Texas in 2021, they had not seen that temperature since 1989. So it's always been our stance. We want to leave that in there and make sure we're including that in the plans. So I don't know that I've seen trends of cold weather temperatures that I can say if truly going away. We do see average temperature increase during that time span, but if anything, I think some of the EPRI reports are saying, while we see that trend, we may still be seeing this frequency of extremes more often. So it even makes me more hesitant to want to not include those years.
Thank you. That makes sense. This may be for either of you. Given the changes in battery cost that NREL reported, and I think I've already asked this before, but do you believe the reference plan that includes battery storage is still feasible with the cost increases that you noticed from last year, from 2022?
When we run the 24 IRP, there are some changes. The fuel cost for the new gas units is going to be a little higher. The capital cost for the new batteries is going to be higher. So how those things balance, won't know till I run the model again. But they're both moving in the same direction. So we could end up with a very similar plan, or we could see changes.
I think I'm going to stop at this point. I may want to ask more questions, but I've been going long enough. Thank you very much.
I'm going to jump in, Mr. Neely, and piggyback on some of Commissioner Carolee Williams' questions. I understand that the IRP is a planning document. I just want to make sure that when we're talking about the addition of solar and when it's seen in, 2026, I think is the first time that the model has said under the reference plan. That 150 megawatts in 2026 and growing to 300 megawatts in a few other years, that's not going to prevent any independent producers, PURPA facilities from being able to interconnect, is it?
Not at all.
I mean, Dominion's not going to say, wait a minute, we said in our plan we don't need solar until 2026. You can't interconnect until 2026.
No, that's not true. No.
Okay.
It won't limit anybody. In fact, we've got 3 PPAs that we've signed that are coming on this year and next year. So we're continuing to add solar.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that's not going to keep solar from growing outside of the plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not at all.
Okay. Thank you. Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you very much. Mr. Neely, I noticed everybody that testified before you threw everything to you as far as the questions. And I think about the third question you threw to somebody else. I was proud of you.
I hope I don't let you down because they may have thrown me too many questions.
Well, and my question may be simple. You know, if you can't tell, I grew up in South Carolina. I've always lived here. And, you know, we hear about extreme weather, but what extreme weather we've had recently was a 1,000-year flood in Columbia and a 100-year storm, I think might be a fair way of saying Elliott, and of course things like Hugo. But people move here and people live here because it doesn't get cold. We don't have extreme weather. And I spend some time down around Beaufort and stuff, and I notice all the solar plant farms and things down there. I don't quite understand, and I don't know who to ask, is why solar is given, in most of what I've read, a zero value during the winter months. Because it's 75 or 80 degrees and I'm out on a boat.
You want to answer that one?
Sure, I can answer that. So certainly solar can produce energy value, but I think the zero number you're seeing is a capacity value number. And when we think about capacity, we're thinking about how much does that resource provide during my peak conditions in the winter. And so we're seeing a zero value for solar in the winter because the peak period, the most at risk period, is in that 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. period. And unfortunately, solar just doesn't provide much output. I think it would make it a lot easier if it did because it
So you
provides a
mean-
lot of capacity value in the summer, but it just doesn't provide
When
significant amount
people are
in the
getting
winter.
up and getting going. And
And loads peaking and the solar's just not there
Well,
to provide capacity.
I still take the position we don't have but about 3 weeks of winter. It just doesn't get that cold. And you know, I'm not questioning how much solar you need or how much should be in your program. That's just something that's always kind of quizzed me in a way as to I really didn't understand it. I think people may have more intelligent questions than me, so I'll pass. Thank you.
Commissioner Caston.
I don't know about that, Commissioner. Mr. Wintermantle, kind of building on the question or so that Carolee Williams, Commissioner Williams asked also. Relative to, I guess, dropping data points, you know, whether it's extreme high or extreme lows. Would she asked, I guess, I think this is what was asked, is there ever a point where you would do that? And, well, I'll let you answer that first.
Yeah, so when we're modeling the future, we are using the 40-year weather history. But I think it needs to be noted that those weather years are given equal probability. So that day, the worst day that we've seen in 1985, you know, it's given kind of a 1 in 40 type probability in our modeling. So it is small, but I think it's hard for me to sit here and say that in 2026 we could not experience the temperatures we saw in 1985. I'm not a meteorologist, but I think as soon as we did, everyone would be looking at me and asking why was that not in our study. So we're very hesitant to remove the history.
Well, I wasn't suggesting that you do.
Right.
Understand. Actually, because what came to mind is some stuff I was involved with years back. Looked at paleoclimatology, and I actually asked a climatologist that question. If this could happen again, she said no. She said it will, only worse, because the population's greater and everything else. But it will happen again. So, and also, at least in that background, we didn't looked at paleoclimatology, looked at try to, 1,000 years, whatever, using whatever available technology, dendroclimatology or whatever. But also looked at, and I think in your study, I think you're the one that talked about doing the statistical analysis where you pick a percent. We wanted to be able to do this at 99% of the time, or 99.5, or 98, or either one of those methods appropriate. Looking at historical data, trying to find low points, high points, or doing models that look at a statistical number.
Yeah. I mean, we've tried to stay away from forcing ourselves to have to develop a statistical analysis. Because what we do is we just take the weather history as it comes to us. The difficulty in that is that when we're modeling the cold weather load response, we have not seen temperatures like we saw in 1985 in the last 5 years. We want to understand the customer load classes today, right? And so we can look at the recent history and try to understand, hey, how is load responding at 14 degrees, 12 degrees, 10 degrees? But we don't have a data point for 3 degrees. So we do, I think where you're going with the statistical analysis and what gets talked about in my testimony is we do have to apply some regression to extrapolate out past temperatures we haven't seen. And that's why we have kind of the low and high cold weather sensitivity, that load response sensitivity is really adjusting those extremes on how will customer load respond. So I will say that we have not seen a lot of saturation in the winter in the events that we have looked at over the years when it has gotten cold. We have not seen load saturate in the winter, whereas more in the summer you might see more saturation. Air conditioners all the way, you're going to saturate load, but in the winter there just seems to be more resistive heating, more options to turn on, and the electricity keeps going higher. Electricity demand.
That did help. That was very helpful. Because as a kid, I think, we had to look at all the famous paintings, and one of them was Washington crossing the Delaware. And we were always told, could you imagine how cold that must have been that day? And then going back further. The other thing, looking at your, in your rebuttal, page 8, it looks like you have it plotted where I guess you went from lowest to highest or highest to lowest, whether you go from left to right or right to left. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the bars are the uncertainty due to weather. And so the 0% case is what we call weather normal. And then you can see how much higher or lower the peak load would get depending on the weather year. And so, yeah, from left to right increases.
So, and numbers are real small, but I was looking at your x-axis there, and it's not chronological. Just for the heck of it, if it was chronological, did you plot that out? Just, is it like this, or?
Yeah, I think it would be a pretty scattered plot. It would be all over the place. But yeah, the weather years have been sorted based on their severity in this chart.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Neely, I wasn't going to ask you this, but I guess there's been so many questions on it. I'm kind of curious too. What is your understanding of what an IRP is?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've done a lot of thinking about that. And I think it's a plan that the utility should pursue. And the most important things in that plan are the early things, the things near term. And for us, that's retiring coal plants. That's the thing that we're focused on pursuing. We're not focused on pursuing that 150 megawatts in 2049. But those all become part of the plan. It helps us determine the value of the early stuff, but it's a plan. It's a guide for the utility to pursue making changes for the future for our customers.
Okay. And speaking of the IRP, when looking at the forecasted compound growth, am I correct in saying that is that 0.9%? Is that the forecasted growth?
Yes.
And in previous hearings, I think I've heard from all the utilities that, I guess, energy demand or growth projections are relatively flat. Is that a true statement?
That is.
Do you happen to know what the forecasted population or customer growth projections are?
Witness Pericelli is going to be able to better answer that question, but we're seeing our customer growth about 10,000 a year.
Dang, you want me to do that math that quick? You know about what percent that is?
Well, we have about 600,000 customers.
Okay, I got it.
Whatever that number is.
Close enough, I got it. So that, off the top of my head, that's, you know, greater than the customer and population forecasted appears to be maybe 3 to 4 times higher than the energy growth projections. Why do you think that is? What are the reasons for that?
Well, one of the clearest indications is the average use per customer, which has been consistently dropping. So the amount of energy that our customer used back in 2008, if you compare that, because we were growing, the load was growing about 3.5% at that time. You compare it, and then we went through the Depression. And since then, the average use per customer has been dropping. And so that's the biggest indicator that people just they're using the energy more efficiently. They're buying more efficient appliances. They're changing the thermostat. They're changing their habits. For whatever reasons, they're using less. The average use per customer has been dropping.
Well, through the course of time, including this hearing, I want to drill down and try to see if we can determine that is. Surely these electrical utilities ought to be able to kind of drill down and find that out. Because I know from a water perspective, over like a 20-year period, there was substantial per capita usage drop, primarily because of the regulatory requirement of water saver devices, which, by the way, caused a lot of sewer lines to clog up because we weren't getting enough flow. But that being the case, the ubiquitous nature of those devices drop per capita usage. So what I'm trying to zero in on, and perhaps other witnesses can address that, is what's causing it. Is it the ubiquitous nature of energy efficiency products at every level? You know, HVAC, appliances, light bulbs? Is it because people like sweating more or being more cold? You know, there's reasons. So if anyone here knows those, please share them.
Yeah, I know myself that the heat pump that I put in my house 2 years ago, much more efficient than the one that it replaced. And everybody's heat pump eventually wears out and gets replaced. So yes, appliances the same way. Light bulbs. Who goes and buys incandescent light bulbs anymore? You can't, right? It's very difficult to. So yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Actually, the oldest refrigerator I had was one that was it wasn't energy efficient at all, but I think it'd last another 100 years if I wanted it to. Also, there's been much discussion relative to challenges of fossil fuel supplies. Are there adequate supplies of these fossil fuels domestically? Are there adequate domestic fossil fuel supplies?
Yes.
And I've heard in previous hearings, including this one, concerns about supply chain issues and their supply chain issues, and relative to raw materials for solar, batteries, are there adequate domestic supply of these raw materials domestically?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Would anyone here today know that?
I don't know that we have a witness that could testify that. Witness Walker may have had some information that would be useful.
Of course. Okay, I'll let you off the hook on that one. We'll catch that one another time. Also, I know there's been a lot of discussion about renewables and the use of hydro generation, the need for more of it. What are, if there are any, limitations with Dominion adding more hydro generation sources?
Hydro is one of the most difficult things to add. We've become very protective of our waterways, and we have done some things with taking existing hydro resources and increasing the capacity of those, and we're doing a project now looking at increasing the capacity of one of our hydro facilities. So new hydro facilities, very difficult to permit and site, but we continue to look at those resources to see if we can upgrade the capacity of those.
For permits and such as that? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
It is a challenge. Just three more questions, I think. Relative to your Plexos model, how many licenses does Dominion have for that Plexos model?
I believe we have 15 licenses that we share with Virginia. So, but that's just 15 users at one time. We can have a lot more people trained in using the model. We just can't have 5 actually running the model, more than 15 running the model simultaneously.
I understand. Do any other parties outside of Dominion have access to your Plexos model?
Yes. When we file our IRP, we also file the model, the Plexos model, and we actually pay for outside interveners to use the model on a limited basis for the IRP analysis.
That's really what I was asking. So are they part of those 15 licenses?
No, they're not.
But they have access to the model and can use the model.
Yes. For the purpose of analyzing the IRP, it's a limited usage.
I understand. And I'm assuming whoever uses it is trained and competent to use it.
Yes.
And relative to, I guess, your stakeholder meetings were, and will, solar environmental interests continue to be included? Were they participants? And I got to be honest, it's been a while since I went through your stakeholder notes that you guys had, and it has a list basically of who was on them.
Yeah.
But will they continue to be included in this stakeholder process?
Yes.
And is everyone's opinion, feedback, input thoughtfully and honestly considered?
Yes, it's definitely honestly considered. We're not obligating ourselves to do any particular thing that somebody suggests, but we do listen. Sometimes it takes us a while to come around, to implement, to, you know, those kind of things, but we do listen to what the feedback we're given.
I know there'll be other questions that I wished I would have asked you, both of you, but I just can't think of them right now. But thank you for answering those. I appreciate it very much.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Irvin?
thank you. Mr. Neely, how are you this afternoon, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Great. I wanted to follow up on one of Commissioner Caston's questions. He asked, are there sufficient fossil fuel resources available? And you answered yes, they are. My question is, what about supply constraint? Because what we've heard is that even assuming that the Mountain Valley pipeline is completed, there's still apparently opposition in North Carolina to extend it into North Carolina, and no guarantee it will ever be a supply for our investor-owned utilities in South Carolina. Would you agree with that?
If the Mountain Valley pipeline is complete, we will have additional capacity in South Carolina because of that. On the
Tell
existing
me how
pipeline.
that works, because I was under the impression that you were constrained in terms of your supply. Could you explain that to me, please?
Well, the better one to answer that question was Rose Jackson, who was here last week. But the way that I understand it works is by that pipeline, which terminates in Virginia, when it's finished, then the resources will be available on the existing pipeline to come our way, because the need to flow, the requirements to flow gas changes directions. And so then we have additional capacity available to us.
Are you speaking of the Transco pipeline?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there's going to have to be a substantial amount of work done to complete the Mountain Valley pipeline, and there would also be additional work to connect to Transco, would it not?
No, the Mountain Valley pipeline is 96% complete.
Okay, so you're confident that you'll have sufficient supply to service a combined cycle unit as you have outlined?
That's one of the sources of supply that we will have, yes.
Are there others?
Potentially, and that we're still in the process of identifying those and getting quotes on what it would take. That doesn't actually get it to the Kennedy site, so there's some pipeline work that needs to be done in state along existing right-of-ways. But yes, we're as you heard this morning, that we're pretty confident that we can get gas. We're still in the process of doing that negotiation and discussions with the pipeline providers, but yes, we're very confident.
Okay. What concerns me is that the plan does not consider what happens if we have an additional spike in natural gas pricing like we experienced about a year ago. And what concerns me is that your customers are going to be exposed to peaks in natural gas pricing, because Dominion Energy South Carolina does not have currently a hedging plan. Wouldn't it be better if we're going to, if what you say is correct, and that we need this combined cycle plant, and it's going to be available for the next 40 to 50, maybe 75 years. Isn't it reasonable and prudent to protect your customers from spikes in natural gas prices that could easily be controlled or contained by a hedging program like most utilities use in the United States, or investor-owned utilities use?
Well, hedging does reduce the volatility, but it does it at a price. And so the price, the increased cost of the hedging program would be part of the fuel cost.
Understand, but without a hedging program, your customers are totally exposed to any spike in natural gas prices, correct?
Yes.
What, I want to switch gears just a minute. What is the long-term plan for the Williams coal facility site? Do you have any thoughts about how it could be used or utilized once it's retired?
We don't have a plan for that site as yet. There are several things that we have considered, but as yet we don't have a plan for that site.
Wouldn't it be prudent to have a plan because you've already got interconnection to the grid, you own the property? Wouldn't there be some cost savings by trying to figure out a way to use the site, incorporating your plan?
That certainly could be.
Can you think of possible ways that it could be utilized? For example, could it be used for a battery storage facility?
It could.
Okay. Are you contemplating, what is the retirement date? Refresh my recollection. What's the projected retirement date for the Williams plant?
We're assuming that it would be retired 12/31/2030.
Okay.
If we're able to execute and on the IRP plan and provide suitable resources to replace it with, its end of life is 2047.
Okay. Now, let's assume that you do go forward with your plan for a combined cycle facility. How long would that meet the needs of the ratepayers in your service area in South Carolina?
I'm sorry, I missed your question. How long will?
Yeah, I'm assuming that you, as a part of the plan, do you kind of pencil in a useful life, or is that just to be determined?
The useful life of the combined cycle?
Yes,
Sir.
sir.
Oh. Yeah, that would be determined, but we would model 40 years initially, which goes out past the end of the IRP. So in the IRP planning horizon, nothing would need to be done with that facility. Eventually, yes, something will need to be done with that facility.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your answers today.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Commissioners, any further questions for this panel? Commissioner Carolee Williams?
Thank you. Commissioner Urban's question made me think of one that I've wondered about, and that is, is it time to start looking at, is it possible to look at any other feasible investment that can happen at BC Summer?
And there are gas resources that are not very far from BC Summer, and so one of the things that we have discussed is the possibility of a gas generating facility there. That doesn't help us with the issues in the Charleston area, though. So that site hasn't come up in discussions most recently.
conversation that you had with Commissioner Caston about stakeholders reminded me of two things. One is this is a whole other world different than the IRP process we went through 3 years ago. Number one, we're not all brand spanking new. And number two, everybody in the room learned a lot. And I just wanted to say I appreciate the differences between where we are now versus then. But the more substantive question is on page 52, there's a note at the bottom of the page that talks about stakeholders that Dominion agreed to use the NREL cost data for solar. In working with that data, Dominion determined that NREL embedded aggressive forecast of future cost reductions for solar technology in it. My sense is that would you talk about that decision and that experience, or point me to the right person?
Talk about the stakeholder process.
No, about, it strikes me that this is one of those examples of where stakeholders said, do this, you did it, you got more involved, you learned more, and you made this note about the concern about the pricing. Would you talk some about that circumstance, less the stakeholder process, but the reality of what you understand? I guess that was just a bridge from his conversations about stakeholder engagement to this example of one where you clearly listened, you did it, but you have concerns. Would you amplify what those concerns are?
Our concerns are when the prices that we see in the NREL data don't line up with the prices we're seeing in the market. And it's not so much about solar, even though that's addressing the solar and how the solar their forecast of solar prices drop as you go into the future until about 2032, somewhere in there, and then it starts growing again. So whether that happens or not, we'll continue to track that. The issue that we've raised more often in this IRP hearing is that the battery cost that were in the NREL data were too low based on what we were seeing in the market. And then the new NREL report actually bumped those prices up. They still see a decline in cost using the same declining cost curve going out of the future, but they bumped up the whole curve, and it looks much more reasonable now. So,
okay.
You know, this is the challenge with producing any IRP. What are the right inputs? What are the right forecasts to use? Because no forecast is perfect, right? You know that. And so we struggle greatly. You know, we recently hired a new modeler to come and work with us. And in that interview process, I gave him a day in the life of a resource planner. And it all starts with determining what the inputs are to the model. What are the inputs? Where do you get the inputs? How do you know that you got good inputs, good forecasts? It's a challenge, but it's one that we take very serious because it's key to the process of doing an IRP. Any of the modeling that we do, the inputs are key. You got to have the best that you can find, and you got to have confidence in those inputs. So, I think that's really what addresses that. The issue that we saw with the NREL data.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Neely, over here. That brings me to a question that I had earlier. And you're talking about the importance of the inputs. Does Dominion discuss the inputs and what y'all are looking at as far as building the I'm going to use the word building the IRP, but do y'all discuss those inputs in the stakeholders group?
Yes, that's one of the primary points of discussion in the IRP stakeholder group is the inputs.
Do they know, do y'all, and tell me how those discussions go. Do you just say this is what we're going to use and then you use them, or do they get to have input and say, well, we think that might be incorrect if you looked at this? I mean, is there a good meaningful discussion?
I think there is. You know, if you were to ask somebody else, maybe they didn't think so. But we do presentations of what we plan to do. A good example is the reliability matrix, or the reliability metric that we use, where we evaluate all of our resource plans based on reliability. When we started the stakeholder process, we had 10 different things that we were going to look at to measure the reliability of a resource plan. Discussions with the stakeholders, they didn't think that some of those were appropriate, and so we went back and evaluated that. Now we're looking at 4 different metrics for reliability. So that's just an example of where the discussion produced a different input.
Well, I reckon where I'm going is when y'all, after you hold a stakeholders group, and by the time you actually produce this document that's titled the Integrated Resource Plan, should anyone be surprised by the inputs that have been used by the utility?
I wouldn't think so. You know, if you turn to, you know, just the cost of the different resources, which is on page 52, you know, we go over that with the stakeholders. They ask questions about that. Why is this higher? Why is this lower? We try to answer those questions. So
Okay.
I wouldn't think that anybody would be surprised. But there again, that's my perspective.
True. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Commissioners, anything further? Any redirect, Mr. Ziegler?
No redirect, Chairman Belson.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony today. You may stand down.
Chairman Belzer, if I could, Mr. Wintermantle needs to catch a flight this evening. Might he be excused?
At your peril.
Very good.
It's my standard answer. Sorry. Safe travels, Mr. Wintermount.
We will certainly make him available electronically if he needs to come back.
Next witness. Mr.
Dominion
Gissenden.
Energy calls Bradley Pericelli and Scott Robinson to the stand.
Gentlemen.
Gentlemen, if you would raise your right hands, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
I don't think that microphone is on, Mr. Gissenden.
Got it. Mr. Pericelli, please state your name for the record.
Bradley Pericelli.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Dominion Energy South Carolina as a senior energy market analyst.
And Mr. Pericelli, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision 22 pages of direct testimony that was previously filed with the commission in this docket?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes.
Okay, would you please share those changes with us at this time?
First, and in tables 1 and 2 on pages 5 and 7, the residential class year sales in 2022 should read 8,424 gigawatt hours, and the kWh per customer would change to 12,585. This change does not change the percent growth in the forecaster history. Next, on page 7, table 2, the industrial class year sales in 2037 should read 6,195 gigawatt hours. This does not change the percent growth in the forecast column from 0.8%, and all other figures in table 2 are correct. Lastly, on page 21, line 12, this should state, Guidehouse also determined that the EV contribution to the annual energy consumption would reach 437 gigawatt hours by 2030 and not 337.
Okay, and subject to those corrections, if I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Bradley Pericelli, as corrected from the stand, be read into the record as if given orally.
Mr. Gissendaner, are y'all going to provide corrected copies for us?
I believe they've already been
Okay.
provided. Is that correct?
I'm just curious because I cannot write as fast as y'all make these corrections.
There we go. Madam Chairman, corrected copies of all of the testimony that was provided at the beginning of the hearing to the hearing
Okay.
reporter.
Thank you very much. Then we will accept Mr. Pericelli's pre-filed direct testimony as corrected from the stand. Will be entered into the record as if given orally. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Pericelli, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision one exhibit labeled as exhibit number BTP1 that was previously filed with the commission as an attachment to your pre-filed direct testimony in this docket?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or additions to your exhibit?
No.
All right, Chair Belzer, I would also move into the record as the next hearing composite exhibit, the exhibit attached to Mr. Pericelli's testimony and labeled as exhibit number BTP1.
Mr. Pericelli's exhibit that accompanied his direct testimony and labeled BPT1 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 7 and received into the evidence of this case.
And just for clarity, it was BTP. I believe you might have said BPT, but I think we're clear.
Well, let me see. I did say that because I wrote it down wrong.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Pericelli, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes.
Would you please share that with us at this time?
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. The purpose of my testimony is to discuss the load forecast, the peak demand forecast, and the forecast scenarios included in GESC's 2023 Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP. The forecast is divided into two parts, the short run and the long run. The short run forecast is made by month and for 2 years and at the individual rate level to support revenue projections. The long run forecast is made by year for 18 additional years. The long run forecast is critical to the long range planning of the company. One way to gauge the reasonableness of the forecast is to compare the forecast with actual results and see if the differences can be explained by known factors such as COVID-19, recessions, changes in energy technology, customer self-generation, or other factors. For example, Table 1, taken from my pre-filed testimony, compares the projected growth rate of the next 5 years to that of the last 5 years. In the case of the residential class, total gigawatt hour, or GWH sales, is projected to grow at essentially the same rate in the future as it has in the past. This suggests that the forecast in this case is reasonably consistent with past observations and indicative of a steadily growing residential customer base. The commercial class showed a slight decrease over the previous 5 years, and we are projecting a slight increase over the next 5 years. This is reasonable since the class experienced the greatest negative impact during the COVID-19 lockdowns in the 2019 through 2021 timeframe. The growth in industrial sales shows the biggest difference between forecasts in history. This disparity can be explained. Over the last 5 years, 2 large customers became co-generators, resulting in the loss of approximately 700 gigawatt hours in sales, which accounts for the negative growth rate. We also know that the industrial presence in our service territory is currently stable and has growing sales. Table 2, also taken from my testimony, shows the projected growth rate in 15-year blocks, with the most recent 15 years compared to the coming 15 years. As shown in Table 2, the residential and commercial sales are expected to accelerate in the future compared to the historical observations. A slight deceleration is projected in the growth in the number of customers for both classes. However, This growth is more than offset by a trend of increasing average use per customer. This is reasonable considering the population growth trends in the service territory, as well as the impact of electric vehicles or EVs. Industrial sales are projected to grow slightly compared to the historical negative growth. This is understandable as the system moves past the recent loss of sales to cogeneration and lingering effects of the Great Recession after 2008. The reference load forecast reflects the updated Guidehouse EV forecast, which resulted in an increased demand from electric vehicles. Under this forecast, the compound average rate of growth in the summer and winter demand over the planning horizon are 0.9% and 0.6% respectively. For the years 2025 and later, the current summer peak demand forecast is generally higher than the forecast presented in 2022. This is due to higher assumed penetrations of EVs, lower assumed levels of demand reductions available through company-sponsored demand-side management or DSM programs, and higher rates of demand growth for residential customers. These increases are offset in part by lower assumed rates of demand for commercial and industrial customers. The 2023 forecast of future winter peak demands are somewhat lower, but generally consistent with those from 2022. This is a result of the fact that most EV charging is anticipated to take place outside of the peak demand periods in the winter. Historically, as measured over 15-year increments from 2001 to 2021, the compound annual growth rate in demand has varied between 0.77% and negative 0.37%, against a compound annual growth rate of 0.31% during that period. An assumed variation of plus or minus 0.5% from the forecasted growth rate of 0.9% reasonably captures the range of expected variation in growth rates going forward as measured by historical data. Given that the current reference forecast is for load growth of 0.9%, an increase or decrease of 0.5% represents a variation of more than 50% from the expected rate of growth. Over 20 years, these high and low growth assumptions create a band around the reference electrical demand forecast of 482 megawatts on the low case and 524 megawatts on the high case, or 8.6% and 9.3% respectively, of the reference forecast of 5,633 megawatts in 2042. The band around the reference energy forecast is between 2,342 gigawatt hours on the low load case and 2,895 gigawatt hours in the high load case, or 8% and 9.9% of the reference forecast respectively. This is a reasonably broad band. Wholesale energy sales currently represent about 3.7% of the company's total sales. The company's largest wholesale customer is currently the city of Orangeburg, which has indicated that it will leave the DESC's system by January 1st, 2024, after which wholesale sales will then only represent about 0.3% of these DESC's total sales. Electric vehicle penetration is expected to grow significantly during the planning period, due in part to accelerating consumer demand, increased model availability, strong political, environmental, and regulatory support. With an increase in EV sales, at home vehicle charging by customers will be a driver of EV load growth and annual energy consumption. Specifically, Guidehouse determined that the EV adoption will have its greatest impact on summer peak load because EV owners are expected to be charging their vehicles at the end of the day when summer peaks occur. In 2037, the estimated contribution to summer peak from EV charging is approximately 358 megawatts, or 6.4% of peak summer demand. Guidehouse also determined that EV contribution to annual energy consumption would reach 437 gigawatt hours by 2030 and 4,409 gigawatt hours by 2050. The latter is approximately 12% of the total energy consumption in 2050 under the reference bill plan and the reference market scenario. The updated forecasted EV contributions to future energy demands are included in the 2023 load forecast. This concludes my summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Pericelli. Have you also prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision rebuttal testimony of 6 pages that was previously filed with the commission of this docket?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No.
So if I ask you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Thank you. Chair Belzer, at this time, I'll move that the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Bradley Pericelli be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Pericelli's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally.
And Mr. Pericelli, have you also prepared a summary of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
Would you please deliver that at this time?
Yes. The purpose of my rebuttal testimony is to respond to the recommendation of the ORS to perform a more detailed analysis to assess reasonableness of residential and commercial class peak load forecasts, and to support the assumption that average peak load for residential and commercial customers will remain constant. Also, I will respond to Witness Stinklick's testimony where he states that DESC is being overly conservative in the winter peak demand forecast by layering in assumptions on the risk. Specifically, the adjustments made to the residential and commercial class for the winter peak load per customer presented in Table 6 of the ORS report appear to be mislabeled as units of kilowatts, while the numerical values are expressed in units of megawatts. This gives the impression of a much smaller reduction than is actually the case. This table has been reproduced in my rebuttal testimony as Table 1 to show a comparison with consistent units. Here's Table 1 from my rebuttal testimony. It should also be noted that these values are net of EVs and energy efficiencies. DSC is expecting to see increases in EV loads even for winter peaks, which would offset some of the expected decreases from energy efficiencies. Similarly, the average peak load per residential and commercial customer is unlikely to remain constant over the forecast horizon. By the year 2037, the residential class is forecasted to reduce its average peak load per customer by approximately 4%. The commercial class is forecasted to reduce its average peak load per customer by approximately 1.25% through 2030 before increasing to 1% in 2037. As it relates to winter peaks, DSC is not double counting the winter risk. Witness Stinklick's statement is based only on a comparison of the historical averages of the winter peaks. The lower winter peaks in recent years are in part a function of warmer weather and not a lack of demand potential on the DESC system. In the data, the winter peak from 2015 reached 4,970 megawatts, and this reinforces that a forecasted peak of 4,902 megawatts is reasonable. As Witness Wintermantle testified, the reserve margin study properly accounts for the uncertainty in extreme weather, and there's no double counting between the reserve margin and load forecast. This concludes my summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Pericelli. Mr. Robinson, please state your name for the record.
Scott Robinson.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Guidehouse Inc. in the capacity of a director of analytics.
And Mr. Robinson, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision direct testimony of 17 pages that was previously filed with the commission in this docket?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No changes.
So if I ask you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Scott Robinson be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Robinson's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally.
And Mr. Robinson, have you also prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision one exhibit labeled as exhibit number SR1, which was a report entitled 2023 IRP Forecast Desk Electric Vehicle and Charging Infrastructure that was previously filed with the commission as an attachment to your pre-filed direct testimony in this document?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your exhibit?
No changes.
Chair Belzer, I would also move into the record as the next hearing composite exhibit, the exhibit attached to Mr. Robinson's testimony and labeled as exhibit number SR1. I note that I believe the version that was filed with the commission originally did not have the exhibit number SR1 notation, but a corrected copy has been provided to the court reporter.
Thank you, Mr. Gissendanner. Mr. Robinson's exhibit SR1 that was attached to his pre-filed testimony will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 8 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Robinson, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes.
Would you please share that with us at this time?
Good afternoon, Chair Belser and members of the Commission. The purpose of my testimony is to report on the methodology and results of the Guidehouse analysis on vehicle electrification that fed into DSC's Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP. Guidehouse developed a forecast for light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles, heavy-duty electric vehicle or EV adoption, charging, and load impacts to support DSC's IRP process. Guidehouse forecasts that between 2023 and 2037, EV sales in DSC's territory will grow by 5,927%, resulting in 464,678 plug-in electric vehicles, or PEVs, on the road by the end of year 2037. Charging for these vehicles is forecast to be supplied by 108,973 level 1, or L1, 251,824 level 2, or L2, and 9,660 direct current fast charging, or DCFC ports by the end of the forecast. By 2037, the charging of EVs in the territory will result in 1,803 gigawatt hours of sales and 327.9 megawatt of coincident peak demand in the territory. This growth is driven by a combination of a near universal shift in OEM, original equipment manufacturer, investment to battery electric powertrains, increasing customer demand, and strong policy support. Energy and peak demand impacts will be further accelerated by increasing fleet vehicle electrification and rated capacity, nameplate KW, of EV charging station ports. Guidehouse used its Vehicle Analytics and Simulation Tool, or VAST, suite to forecast the resource requirements on DESC's electric system caused by load additions from EVs. Guidehouse developed the VAST adoption module. Guidehouse deployed the VAST adoption module, VAST charging infrastructure module, and VAST load impacts module. These modules were run in serial to forecast the number of EVs on the road in the service territory, to determine the electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSE, required to charge these vehicles, and to simulate the load shapes, energy in kilowatt hour, and coincident peak demand in kilowatt associated with the charging behavior of vehicles refueling on the charging network in the DSC territory. The forecast closely reflects local market conditions. VAST also forecasts the charging needs of vehicles by technology, L1, L2, and DCFC, as well as use case, home, public, market, workplace, fleet depot, hub, curbside residential, etc. This EVSE creates a hypothetical network from which vehicles may charge given the compatibility of an EVSE use case and the vehicle type. VAST load forecasting module simulates the load impacts of the vehicle and charger ecosystem. Each vehicle class and duty combination has an associated efficiency, miles per kilowatt hour, and a vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. The total annual energy requirements from each vehicle type are then associated with the relevant charging use cases, each of which has a distinct load shape. Peak capacity impacts are derived directly using the on-peak window for the company. The most significant drivers of the projected growth in PEV adoption are: 1, the announced investment and corresponding PEV sales targets and model releases by major automakers. 2, increasing customer demand for PEVs in South Carolina. And 3, the strong global policy support for PEVs and the feedback between policies and investment. Plug-in electric medium-duty and heavy-duty, or MDHD, vehicles are in the beginning stages of electrification. Overall, PEVs are forecast to make up 3.65% of the total MDHD vehicle fleet by 2030. 95% of these PEVs are forecast to be full battery electric vehicles. Current automaker investment is the strongest leading indicator of future model availability, production, and sales priorities for original equipment manufacturers. Between 2025 and 2035, 11 of the 15 largest automakers have committed to at least 50% BEV, full battery electric vehicle, sales targets. Even the 4 automakers, Toyota, Subaru, Honda, and Nissan, that have not committed to full battery electric vehicle sales targets have targets of at least 40% PEVs. That includes hybrids. Automaker PEV sales targets are backed by committed or planned investment, as worldwide publicly released commitments sum to nearly $1.2 trillion for PEVs. These national and global trends are forecast to impact the South Carolina vehicle market. Customer preference, as measured by vehicle sales, also indicates two important trends in South Carolina. Number one, overall demand for PEVs is growing exponentially. And number two, full BEV demand is increasing much more quickly than PHEVs. As public charging infrastructure expands, the current demonstrable customer preference for BEVs is expected to accelerate. In the U.S., 40% of the new vehicle market is influenced by the California Air and Resource Board, or CARB, ZEV program, or state programs mirroring the CARB standards. In effect, the standards require 100% of light-duty new vehicle sales to be ZEV, zero emissions vehicle, by 2035 in participating states. This will affect other non-ZEV states like South Carolina as OEMs respond to shrinking internal combustion engine markets. Since vehicle markets are global in scope, this is compounded by similar policies in Europe and Asia. Strong federal policy support, such as the IIJA and IRA, have also accelerated electric vehicle markets. The IRA removed OEM-specific caps on federal tax credits, but limited vehicle eligibility based on price and North America-based production. As OEMs shift production to match IRA incentive requirements, the effective size of the credit to the average customer will increase. By reducing the effective MSRP, the IRA is expected to increase customer demand for PEVs. Additionally, the IIJA has made federal funding available for state NEVI programs, National Electric Vehicle Charging Infrastructure, which will increase the availability of public charging ports. The Act also made multiple grants available for buses, effectively pulling forward the electrification of bus fleets. Ultimately, the load forecast in the DESC territory is driven by multiple dynamics. Electric vehicle adoption is growing exponentially in DSC's service territory and will continue to do so for the due to the combined effects of OEM investment, strong customer demand, and strong policy support. At the same time, charging infrastructure build-out is expected to increase to fill the gap between supply, the EV ports, and demand from vehicles. EVSE development is increasing as the number of PEVs increase, and the share of PEVs increasingly shifts towards full BEV, and ports are built at higher capacity levels. While fleet-owned vehicles and the associated EVSE make up only a small portion of the total PEV on the road for DESC in the forecast, these vehicles contribute disproportionately to the energy and demand impacts for the territory. Together, these trends mean that the contribution to the DESC territory by electric vehicle load will be exponential throughout the forecast horizon. This concludes my summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Chair Belzer, Mr. Pericelli, and Mr. Robinson are available for cross-examination by the parties and for questioning by the commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Gissendanner. Sierra Club.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Good afternoon, panel. My name is Bree Ziegenhagen, and I represent the Sierra Club. I'm going to start out with directing my questions to the panel. But first, Mr. Robinson, on page 4, lines 1 through 3 of your direct testimony, you state that by 2037, the charging of electric vehicles in the company's service territory will result in 327.9 megawatts of peak demand in the territory. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Mr. Pericelli, in your direct testimony on page 21, lines 5 through 7, you say that in 2037, the estimated contribution to summer peak EV load from EV charging is approximately 358 megawatts of peak summer demand. Is that right?
That's correct.
Can you just explain the difference in those two numbers?
Sure. So we realized later we're looking at different hours in the day.
Okay. And so can you just confirm that the summer peak EV demand of 358 megawatts was used in the company's 2023 annual energy and peak forecast that was used in this IRP?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Pericelli, could you pull that microphone so that when you turn your head, you can?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. Pericelli and Mr. Robinson, were you present yesterday when Ms. Best testified about the forthcoming Guidehouse study on time of use rates and directed questions on time of use rates to this panel?
Yes.
I was not. However, we're prepared to discuss it.
Okay, and either of you can answer this. What is your understanding of the purpose of that forthcoming Guidehouse study?
My understanding of that purpose is the company hasn't updated time of use rates in a long time. So if we're beginning the process to look at that and see what new time of use rates may look like, do we need to update the hours when on peak and off peak may be? So that's the purpose of it.
And yesterday, Ms. Best mentioned that part of that purpose was in response to the new federal incentives and other incentives driving EV load growth that you mentioned earlier in both of your summaries and testimonies, correct?
So it certainly could be something that an EV customer could use. That's correct.
And then would you agree that time of use rates are a tool that the company could use to shift the EV charging load off peak?
Well, we currently have time of use rates in place now.
Okay, and is it also fair to say that since the time of use study is in its very initial phases, the company did not know the extent to which EV load could be shifted off peak when conducting the summer peak EV load forecast used for this IRP?
I would disagree with that, and Mr. Robinson can attest to the details, but when the EV forecast was performed, the time of use rates that we have now were in there, and quite honestly at a generous rate.
And yeah, just a bit more detail. So currently TOU penetration in debt service territory is quite low. Ballpark 1%, maybe less. Maybe Mr. Pericelli knows a bit more than I do, but we purposely used a higher percentage in the EV study to just account for future participation the best we could. So we increased that to 10% for residential, which is obviously quite a bit higher, and 5% to commercial to reflect a more full-fledged TOU participation. So in summary, we feel like that accounts for TOU program impacts.
Are you aware that in some cases, other utilities have used effective TOU design to shift more than 85% of that EV load off peak?
Of participating customers for those use cases, correct.
And is it possible that the TOU rate design could be, or let me rephrase, is it possible that more effective TOU rate design could be the most cost-effective means to meet the company's forecasted EV load demand?
There's no way to know at this point. I mean, we'd have to see what is the new TOU rates, how much do customers, how willing are they to adopt it, and not only adopt it, but change their behavior. So I don't know if there's any way to know at this point.
And No,
just
please
to
continue.
opine, Guidehouse has studied the price sensitivity, the price elasticity of customers to TOU in other jurisdictions. While we haven't done a metering study for DSC, and it varies obviously, but the highest determinant is the percentage of residential customers in that EV population. Residential customers tend to be very price responsive to that TOU, but other use cases, such as even public charging, commercial charging of fleets, workplace charging that's shared, SUD charging, all of those use cases are much less price sensitive. So it depends on that mix of charging and where customers get their demand from.
Okay, and then final question on time of use. When the results of that forthcoming Guidehouse time of use study are available, will Dominion conduct a new EV load forecast and submit that in the next 2024 IRP update?
I don't know if it'll be ready by then, but the rates would have to be developed. They'd have to obviously come before this commission for approval. So once we know what the rates are, they're approved and in place, and we can see what customers' response would be, yes, that will be updated in our future iterations of the IRP forecast.
Now moving on, Mr. Pericelli, on page 20, lines 11 through 13 of your direct testimony, you said federal vehicle and infrastructure investments in the IRA and the IIJA, including tax credits, high-speed charging stations, electric school and transit buses, will boost EV sales, increase customer demand, and decrease range anxiety hurdles. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what page and line are we on again?
Apologies, page 20, lines 11 through 13.
Okay. Yes, that's correct.
And those federal vehicle and infrastructure investments include the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program featuring essentially high-speed chargers on highways, also known as NEVI, correct?
I would have to defer to Mr. Robinson on that. He knows more about the specific programs, but I know that those IRA and IIJ was included, yes.
NEVI is funded through the IIJA.
Mm-hmm. And also included in those federal incentives is the Clean School Bus Program, providing funds for electric school buses.
That's correct.
And also those federal incentives provide further incentives for electric transit buses also, right?
Correct.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to ask a very limited set of questions pertaining to Dominion's programs that can support the use of school bus batteries as grid storage assets to defray the cost, the school district's cost of electrification, and to defray the cost of distribution grid upgrades. Are you aware that South Carolina school districts have received $64 million in federal funding to acquire over 160 electric school buses under the Clean School Bus Program?
I don't dispute that, but I don't know that specifically.
Mr. Robinson, were you aware
Likewise.
of that?
Not aware of the exact amount, but I know that funding has been applied for, and I think it'll be made available for purchases in Route 2024.
Okay. And then are you aware that utilities such as Dominion and Virginia have programs that would allow school districts to use their school bus batteries as grid storage assets, grid energy storage assets, and in doing so defray the cost of electrification, otherwise known as vehicle to grid or V2G?
I am aware they have the program in Virginia, yes.
And does DESC anticipating offering such V2G programs in South Carolina?
I don't know that. That would be outside of my purview.
And to your knowledge, the company has not included in this IRP any plans for programs that would allow school districts to engage in that V2G.
I don't believe so. I'm not aware of that. That's been included in this. It certainly was not included in my load forecast.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zingenhagen. CCL?
No questions.
Thank you. CCEBA?
Chair Belser, no questions from CCEBA for this panel.
Thank you. ORS?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for this panel? Commissioner Carolee Williams?
I'll start with one. I may have more coming later. Thank you for being here. My curiosity is about EVs and whether the Guidehouse study will look at, and Dominion will look at, whether it is better to consider peak usage or usage where there may be excess solar on the grid. Does that question make sense to you?
It does.
Yeah.
I think it's probably more of a future kind of thinking question. I do think it has a little bit of relationship within the next 15 years as we think about excess solar. So it's really a big, sorry it's not any more specific than that, but I look forward to the answer.
I think I'll go first. I think that has to do with what we're looking at with the update of the TOU rates right now. What makes the most sense for our system today? It's very early stages. I don't have any direct input, but I know the parties that are involved are system planning, obviously the rates group. Our team's been involved. So those types of considerations are being taken for, what does our system look like now and what makes the most sense as we develop these rates moving forward.
Just like to add, there are lots of different interactions with time of use programs and other customer DSM programs that can work with electric vehicles. From my experience in other states, we have seen programs working directly with OEMs, for example, to optimize for the reduced curtailment of renewable resources to make those PVs work more for the grid. But it's very small scale at this point because you might imagine that OEMs like Tesla don't like to give away their secret sauce and let other people control the charge and discharge of their customers' batteries. So those are very, very small at the moment. But certainly the interaction between TOU, increased renewable penetration, and EVs makes it makes things more fun for modelers like me, but it also makes planning more difficult. So
Could that, at any point in the next 15 years, kind of impact the, was it 300 megawatts of solar a year that Dominion is putting into the IRP system, Plexo system? Does that question?
The question makes sense, Commissioner. I don't know the answer to that because that's not my area of expertise.
Okay.
Likewise, sorry.
Okay. And this is more for the future, but how much of a role do the telematics of the vehicle play into the time of use rates and the ease of uptake?
So we haven't done a telematics study in South Carolina for DSC, so I can only speak to other territories, and so it has to be a bit anecdotal, if that's all right. But one thing that we have seen that's useful for the new telematics data in analyzing impacts of electric vehicles is we're able to more granularly, both in terms of time and place, figure out where those EVs are charging. So I spoke about that electric vehicle charging ecosystem. That's one of the difficult things about EVs is it's not like an air conditioner. The vehicle, the load drives around and can move from a residential account to a commercial account to an industrial account, just depending on where it is. So using that telematics data, we can have a better idea of what the effective vehicle's load shape is as it switches between those different charging use cases. Typically, it'll be moving. Our assumption right now is that, and this is from metering data, that vehicles will be charging primarily at home. About 90% or more of their energy comes from home charging. So that's a residential use case, and it is the most flexible, as I mentioned to the council. It means it has the highest price sensitivity. So that's really good if you want to manage that load and reduce that peak through something like a TOU rate or another DSM program like direct load control. However, if the vehicle moves to a public charging station or a workplace charger, that same TOU program may not be applicable, or the load may be less flexible.
Will you say that again?
Yeah. So, hands-on example. If you're driving your vehicle and you've charged it at home, that charger may have very, very high downtime. In other words, most of the time it's just sitting there doing nothing. You only maybe will charge twice a week or so. However, when you leave your house and you're on a road trip or something like that, and you're nearing 15 or 20% in your battery capacity, it's like having, running close to empty on your ICE vehicle. You want to charge it right away. You might not care if the price is 2 times higher. Okay. So therefore, you're going to stop and charge. What that means to an econometrician like me is you have lower price sensitivity. So that means that the TOU program is going to be a little less effective. Same is true for fleets and workplace where they may not have flexible schedules.
Thank you. And at least for the minute, the only other question I have has to do with the report that was included in Mr. Robinson's exhibit. And it indicates that it was done for Dominion in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. The data that we're given is all South Carolina. Can you explain
Yeah, we do
what I'm looking at?
We do work with the other companies.
Okay.
This report in particular is specific to the DSC territory.
Okay. Thank you very much. No further questions for this minute.
Mr. Robinson, you just referred to yourself as what? It wasn't a mathematician and it wasn't a statistician. It was what?
I wear a lot of different hats. Econometrician.
Okay.
So basically, we try to measure the response between price, supply, and demand, or even very, very esoteric things like customer behavior, my willingness to adopt a technology subject to different market barriers and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is that a real major?
Depends who you ask.
I'm not sure how to, well, let me ask you this. Has anyone from South Carolina said hook 'em horns to you yet?
Yes.
Dang it.
Hook 'em.
Okay. Trying to understand and looking at the tables from yours, Mr. Pellet. Let me find it.
Pericelli.
Thank you. You also show historical, 5-year and 15-year customer growth and energy demand. And then the projected, and still, it's relatively flat now. I think the customer growth was around 1.7 or forecasted, let's see, for 15 years, 1.4 history, 1.1 forecast. Looking back over the last 15 years, is it 1.4% customer growth on table 2? Is that what I'm looking at?
For the 15-year period, for residential, that's correct, 1.4% historical growth. And then the forecasts, we're saying a slight deceleration, but still growth, 1.1%.
Right. And as far as the sales, which I'm assuming sales, is that synonymous with energy demand?
Sales is load. Demand is like a 1 hour period.
Okay, got it. And that shows the previous 15 years, -0.3, which I'm assuming, is that a big portion of that from the 2 large industries that I think Mr. Neely or you or someone said you lost, or is that?
Can you direct me which, you talking about the
Oh, I'm
commercial
sorry, I'm on
sector?
table 2 again.
Okay.
When you look at all sales, total gigawatt sales.
So for the 15-year table in commercial, historically there was a 0.3% decline in total sales. I mentioned some of the reasons for that. Commercial level during COVID was really hit hard.
Gotcha.
They were forced to close, and that hurt their businesses.
I understand. And that forecast projection is 0.9, less than 1%.
So for total, okay.
For total.
I think let me go back a little bit. I was speaking to commercial. So all sales for historical 15-year, 0.3% negative, correct. But into the future, yes, 0.9% growth, 15 years into the future. I'm with you now.
And probably need to ask Ms. Shelton, but why do you think that growth is flat?
So, Commissioner, I'll tell you what I know, and then I'll tell you what I think. So we know that a couple things have happened. There have been effective DSM programs implemented. There have been effective, federal guidelines in terms of appliance efficiency. Like Mr. Neely mentioned, you get a new HVAC, it is going to use less. As new buildings, new homes are built, they're in general going to be more energy efficient. Those are things that I know. So things that I think, I've lived in South Carolina my entire life, drive around Columbia, and there is just a lot of these multi-family units going up. You see it in Charleston as well. So I think there's some function of, less square footage. So if our customers and if our incremental new customers have less square footage, that's naturally going to lend to less per customer as well. I've not studied that, so I want to make sure that's clear. That's just what I think, an observation of mine, but I believe that's factoring in too. So there are some real effects from things that we know, but I think there's some changes in how people live, just the size of their homes as well.
Thank you. And that's, yeah, I was looking at, it says you're responsible for developing and improving accuracy of predictive models. And I thought, well, maybe that's got something to do with kind of drilling down and finding out why is it this way?
Yes, sir.
Is that part of your responsibility?
Yes, sir. We're always looking for new things. I mean, to make it better, you know, we have to go based on what we know. You know, when there's things of energy efficiency like the IRA, we don't know what's in it right now as far as energy efficiency. So, you know, with the EVs, that was set at a federal level. But a lot of these individual stuff, the vast majority of that funding is being sent to the states, and it's up for the states to say, here's how it's going to be sent, you know, be utilized. That hasn't been defined for South Carolina yet, so we can't put that in our forecast because I don't know that. So we can, based on what we know, we can look forward.
And this is probably a combination question, so y'all tag team it because I'm not even sure I know how to ask it. But looking at your sales forecast and your Guidehouse study relative to EV demands, how do those mix? And I know a lot will depend on whether you come up with a good time of use. It'll depend on a lot of things, but with your study combined with their forecast, shake it all up and what comes out.
I think I can answer that. So I think the best way to think about how we do the forecast, every year we start from scratch. We baseline it on what we know today. And we start with a process of, okay, here's our line of sight. Based on the things we know today that are in place, that are true, here's what that looks like going forward. And then in the future, there are some things we know. So the things we know now, okay, we're going to make incremental changes to that forecast, EV being one of them. So we know there are some EVs on our system today. So those are in that baseline. But we can't account for, you know, how is that, you know, new customers or new EV customers on our system. Okay, then that's when this is going to come in. It's the same thing with like the DSM forecast. We know where we're at. We capture where we're at today in terms of energy efficiency or, you know, how our customers' behavior patterns. But then we take the DSM study and say, okay, well then this is based on what we know in the future, say this is what we think their efficiency will change. So we set that baseline and then there's incremental changes to it based on factors we know today.
Understand. Thank you. I appreciate you, gentlemen. Is this the first time you've been to South Carolina, Mr.?
This is the second time I've been to South Carolina and the second time I've testified in front of the commission.
If I was there the first time, I apologize for forgetting. But let me welcome you.
It was remote. It was remote the first time. It was during COVID,
Okay.
so. Yeah.
Good. And let me wish you a good Go Tigers. Thank you.
Commissioners, any further questions for this panel? Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
So my daughter has a master's from University of Texas, not in your field, but anyway, it's a good school. I have a kind of a human behavior type question. It's probably for you, Mr. Robinson. Every now and then we'll hear about using electric vehicles to put energy back on the grid. And you were just asked about the, you know, knowledge of the school bus situation and so forth. But, you know, I've heard comments about, so, you know, you have a storm and the power goes out, we can use EVs to power up the grid. And just based on the way human behavior is, we can be very, very generous and very, very selfish. And, you know, around here, when we have snowstorms, you go to the grocery store and the bread and milk is gone, and people are just not sharing it. So I guess what I'm asking is there any real studies that can say Yeah, people are going to be powering up the grid from their EVs. Is that realistic?
So there's a lot to unpack. It's actually one of the areas that I'm super interested right now. Not a lot has been studied. It's a very interesting area. The combination of resiliency and electric vehicles, like you said, a lot of people are interested in it. There's a few things that we do know. So number one, it puts linemen at danger if you're trying to send power from a vehicle to another place on the grid during an extreme weather event or an outage. So because they're trying to repower the line. So that is strongly should be disincentivized, should be not allowed. But the batteries in the vehicles are very useful for the customer to use on site during that same outage. And for those critical facilities like schools, it's a potential to replace generators or something like that, or supply additional power to allow for longer periods of outage for those, or multiple redundant systems to those areas. I actually have a Ford's home integration system at my own house because our power is very unreliable, not like in South Carolina where I live, and the potential there is really high. Sending power back to the grid is trickier. As you might imagine, we distinguish in the industry between vehicle to vehicle or V2V, V2G, which is that export, or the V2H or V2B, which is vehicle to home or vehicle to building. Vehicle to home, vehicle to building, much more mature technology, much easier. It's already commercially available. A lot of OEMs are doing it. So I think that technology is already in the market, very promising. V2G, also very promising, but a bit further away. It's in pilot stages right now. There are a lot of handshakes between the incentive mechanism that you want customers to respond to, because just like you mentioned, in and of itself, customers are not going to just donate their energy to the grid. You need to make it worth their while. Something like a time of use rate starts the building block to make that possible, because you have, with a time varying price signal, you have a incentive for that arbitrage to take place. So that's number one. But there are also a lot of hardware and software requirements that you have to make between, the vehicle's DC power and what the grid requires. So very exciting area for development, but it is still very early.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That's all.
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
This may be a redundant question, but it just means that I need to hear the answer again. And it may be framed a little bit differently, but I think this is for Mr. Pericelli. You, I think, state that you don't agree with ORS regarding the average peak loads for residential and customer classes in the forecast horizon, correct?
That's correct. It was based, I don't agree because the mistake in the units from KW to MW, we've all done it before.
Okay. That's resolved then.
Yes.
Thank you. I did hear that. Appreciate it. No further questions.
Commissioners, anything further for this panel? Mr. Gissendaner, any redirect?
No redirect, Chair Belzer.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony today. I'm glad you taught me a new word, Mr. Robinson, but I know I won't be able to spell it. But I've at least heard it. Anyway, thank you very much for your testimony. You may stand down.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chair Belzer, to the extent that Mr. Robinson needs to catch a flight back to Wyoming to avoid the weather, we would plan to present him virtually.
Thank you,
if he's
Mr.
recalled.
Gissendaner. Safe travels. Let's take a 15-minute break. We'll be back at 4:10, please. Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Public Service Commission as we continue the hearing in docket number 2023-9-E involving Dominion Energy South Carolina's 2023 Integrated Resource Plan. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin, present in the hearing room. We have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. We are still on the company's case. Mr. Ziegler?
Madam Chair, I apologize.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Mr. Huber.
Yes, this is Chris Huber for ORS. I had a brief housekeeping matter I wanted to bring up before the next witness was called. It's related to the schedule for tomorrow. I can do that now, or if you prefer, I wait till the end of the day, I can.
You've already broached it, let's go.
Well, ORS was granted a date certain for two of our witnesses, Mr. Hyatt and Ms. Wellborn, who are testifying as a panel tomorrow. They both reference a report that was attached to Anthony Sandonato's direct testimony. And Ms. Dawn Hipp is planning to adopt Mr. Sandonato's testimony because Mr. Sandonato is no longer with ORS. We were going to request to call Ms. Hipp out of order ahead of Mr. Hyatt and Ms. Wellborn tomorrow.
Have you discussed that with the other parties?
We did send an email to the other parties last week, and I've not received any objection. The other option I wanted to propose is if there were no questions regarding Mr. Sandonato's testimony.
Let's not go there.
Okay.
I think, would there be any objection to taking Ms. Hipp out of order so that, hearing none, we can accommodate that tomorrow?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Ziegler.
Chair Belcher, the company would call Cheryl Shelton to the stand.
Ms. Shelton, please come forward.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Please state your name for the record.
Turn that microphone on, please, ma'am. There you go. Thank you.
Cheryl Shelton.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Dominion Energy, South Carolina. I'm the manager of demand side management.
And have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision and direction certain written, pre-filed direct testimony that's been been placed in the docket of this case?
Yes, I have.
Are there any corrections to that testimony?
No, there are not.
If I were to ask you the questions contained in that testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would be.
Madam Chair Belser, we would move the introduction of Ms. Shelton's pre-filed direct testimony into the record.
Ms. Shelton's pre-filed direct testimony will be received into the record as if given orally from the stand.
And am I correct that there are no exhibits to that testimony?
That's correct.
Have you prepared a summary of that testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please deliver it to the commission and to the parties?
Yes, I will. Good afternoon, Chair Belser and members of the Commission. The purpose of my testimony is to give an overview of DESC's 2023 DSM potential study and describe how the company developed its 15-year energy savings and demand savings forecast and how we engage the members of the advisory group through the course of the study and in the 2023 IRP. In late 2021, DESC launched a comprehensive DSM potential study to determine the achievable and maximum levels of DSM energy sales and demand reductions that DESC can achieve for its customers consistent with cost effectiveness. In order number 2021-429, the Commission required DESC to use cost-effective, reasonable, and achievable as the standard for evaluating potential DSM savings in future IRPs. DESC's current DSM portfolio is based on the findings of its 2019 DSM potential study and the 2021 DSM high case rapid assessment. In consultation with the advisory group, DESC selected ICF as the third-party provider for the 2023 DSM potential study. ICF assessed both the potential and cost effectiveness of 218 individual energy efficiency or EE measures if implemented in DESC's territory. The study evaluated the technical, economic, achievable, and maximum achievable potential of EE programs in the DESC service area over a 15-year forecast period. ICF and DESC consulted with stakeholders through the advisory group during each phase of the study. Those consultations included the scope and design of the study, its methodology, customers' homes and building characteristics, model load shapes to be used, and the universe of DSM measures that ICF would evaluate. Between November 2021 and November 2022, DESC and ICF held 7 advisory group meetings. Also in consultation with the advisory group, DESC chose Opinion Dynamics Corp, or ODC, to undertake a comprehensive market assessment to characterize DESC's customer service territory in terms of the types, ages, and conditions of housing and other building stock and energy-consuming equipment to provide reliable estimates of the opportunities and barriers for generating savings through DSM programs. ICF's evaluation considered ODC's market assessment and previous evaluations results obtained through DESC's current portfolio of DSM programs as verified by ODC, who also serves as the Evaluation, Measurement, and Verification, or EMMV, evaluator for the current programs. In the 2023 DSM Potential Study, ICF identified 3 DSM scenarios that capture potential levels of energy sales reduction over the forecast period: a medium case, a high case, and a low case. Under the median case, also referred to as the achievable potential, ICF determined that DESC would achieve a 0.51% gross energy sales reduction due to EE programs in 2024. Based on challenging but reasonable assumptions as to its implementation scenarios and obstacles, MMV results, customer response, and resulting energy savings, while considering the effect of influences outside of the company's control, like field staffing, pandemic, and energy supply chain disruptions of recent years. Under the high case, which is the maximum achievable potential, ICF determined that DESC could achieve 0.74% of gross energy sales reduction. ICF based this conclusion on several factors, which included benchmarking the performance of comparable programs in similar regions, climates, and regional jurisdictions to DESC. The high case also assumed the most aggressive marketing scenarios, customer acceptance rates, and energy savings levels that could be reasonably supported. ICF determined that any scenario higher than the maximum achievable scenario would be hypothetical because it would include measures that are not cost-effective and participation rates beyond those that could be reasonably assumed. The low case assumes that DESC achieves 90% of the levels described in the median case as a result of more unfavorable conditions than those assumed in the median case, which could arise through economic recession, waning of customer interest, staffing shortages, supply chain disruptions, and other implementation problems. Under the low case, ICF determined that DESC could achieve a 0.46% gross annual reduction in sales. As required by Commission Order 2020-832, DESC instructed ICF to further evaluate the cost-effectiveness and achievability of DSM portfolios reaching annual energy sales reductions of 1%, 1.25%, 1.5%, 1.75%, and 2%. ICF did not find a 1% case or any higher to be achievable and found that energy sales reductions beyond 0.74% would require non-cost-effective measures and unreasonable program participation assumptions. Among the facts supporting these findings are that DESC's DSM programs are now in their 13th program year, and many of the easy-to-reach customers are readily available savings have been captured. In addition, increasingly stringent federal and state energy efficiency standards for lighting, HVAC units, appliances, and electrical equipment and improved building construction standards limit the additional energy reductions that can be generated through DSM programs or increase the cost of obtaining them. DESC intends to expand its DSM program significantly based on the 2023 DSM potential study. But as a point of comparison, in the last evaluated program year, at the time I prepared my testimony, which ended November 30th, 2021, or program year 11, DESC achieved a reduction in total energy sales of 0.40%. All DSM scenarios discussed here increase savings, even the low case. But it's important to recognize that the 0.4% result is not the result of programs not being effectively delivered or failing to achieve high participation levels. In PY11, participation exceeded 179% of the forecast. Despite this admirable level of participation, DESC still was not able to achieve the energy savings that had been forecasted due to lower levels of energy savings achieved from the measured mix that customers implemented. All three scenarios, low, medium, and high, as provided in the 2023 DSM potential study, have forecasted higher energy savings values than the latest EMMV results. As part of the 2023 DSM potential study, ICF also completed a comprehensive evaluation of demand response, or DR programs, for both residential and commercial customers, with an emphasis on decreasing the winter peak. Unlike most other DSM programs, which primarily seek to reduce energy consumption, DR programs seek to reduce peak demand on the system, and for that reason, DR programs are principally measured on their ability to reduce system peak. ICF determined that there are 8 DR programs that are potentially cost-effective on DESC's system in certain configurations. Of these, time of use rates, or TOU, critical peak pricing, and peak time rebates are potential residential programs with high levels of cost effectiveness and broad potential applicability. They involve motivating demand reductions through price signals during peak periods. A smart thermostat program for residential customers also scored well. ICF modeled the effects of bundling these programs for each of the 3 principal customer segments. It modeled the time of use program both on an opt-in and opt-out basis, and modeled sensitivities for all programs based on high, medium, and low assumptions concerning participation rates. ICF forecasted that under an opt-in scenario for time of use, an achievable reference case suite of DR programs could reduce winter peak demand by 4.74% in 2025, rising to 9.47% in 2037. ICF also modeled an opt-out scenario, but DESC is less likely to pursue offering programs under this model based on customer comments collected during the ODC market study, which indicates a strong customer bias against this approach. DESC's DR programs will ideally be based on 1 year of usage data after completion of AMI rollout to establish a baseline, and will be tariff-based. So commission approval will be required for rate changes. Achieving the forecasted results will depend largely on participation levels and customer response to the price and other signals provided. As a result, the success of the DR program rollout will depend on availability of skilled implementation professionals, timely regulatory approval, favorable customer acceptance rates, and other factors. The specific short-term action plans the company intends to take related to the 2023 DSM potential study are to create for each program individual DSM EE 5-year program plans in collaboration with the advisor group will include details of marketing efforts, customer engagement techniques, design of program delivery, and incentive rebates amount. In addition, DSC will timely report any changes to the Commission on the implementation timeline. Whoop, I missed a line. I read too fast. In addition, DESC will report timely any changes to the Commission on the development of any individual EE program plan and provide updates on the implementation timeline of any program modification or new measures within existing programs through Commission filings in 2023 and 2024. Additionally, while pending the complete installation of AMI meters, DESC will continue to collect data to tailor the demand response programs that it will propose for residential customers, undertake the process of selecting the DR programs to implement in its service territory, and will timely report the development of these details to the advisory group. I respectfully request the Commission to affirm that the 2023 DSM potential study satisfies the requirements of the prior Commission orders, including order numbers 2021-429 and 2020-832. Specifically based on current market and other data, a reasonable estimate of the achievable level of energy demand reduction to be anticipated from cost-effective DSM programs on DSC's system is 0.51%. The maximum achievable reduction on DES system, assuming consistently favorable conditions and high customer acceptance and participation levels, is 0.74%, and an appropriate low-level case is 0.46%. This concludes my summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Shelton. Chair Belser, Ms. Shelton is available for cross-examination by the parties and questions from the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. Sierra Club.
No questions from Sierra Club.
Thank you. SACE CCL.
Good afternoon, Ms. Shelton. My name is Emma Clancy, and I'm here representing CCL and SACE. It's nice to see you again. Now, Act 62 requires the Commission to consider consumer affordability when determining whether utilities plan is the most reasonable and prudent, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And so you serve as the manager of demand-side management and energy conservation for Dominion, correct?
I do.
And in that role, you manage the company's demand-side management programs and portfolios, right?
That's correct.
And so I imagine a lot of that involves figuring out how to engage with the utilities customers on efficiency measures and savings opportunities, right?
Yes.
Now, you would agree that energy efficiency can reduce the need for the company to build additional generation, right?
It's getting it has the potential to assist, but I have not seen that energy efficiency has been able to replace the need for new generation. I have not seen that.
Well, energy efficiency has the potential to offset load growth or reduce load that the company might
That
have
is
to
correct.
build
I would
for.
agree with that statement.
Great. And those benefits that could potentially save costs are system level, so they benefit all customers if costs for new generation, say, could be avoided, right?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially. Energy efficiency measures also benefit the individuals who install the energy efficiency measure by helping them to manage their energy bill, right?
Absolutely.
And so, for example, when a customer switches to a more efficient heat pump, as we've heard discussed today, or insulates their homes, that can reduce their overall energy consumption and help to reduce energy costs.
That's certainly what we hope. I mean, there are customers that purchase a new unit and then realize their unit works more efficiently, and then they'll turn their thermostat down more, but ideally they use less energy.
And
Yes.
it gives them the power to manage that usage.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And being able to manage that usage is especially important for South Carolina customers because, as I'm sure you're aware, South Carolina customers have some of the highest energy bills in the country, right?
Yes, they tend to be higher, yeah.
Now, and in addition to that, as we heard at the public hearing yesterday, fuel cost increases over the past year have driven up residential bills by about 18%, correct?
Yes.
And wouldn't you agree that more efficient homes, better insulated homes, homes with more efficient devices, they're less exposed to the impacts of fuel cost volatility because they can simply require less energy?
If their behavior is in line with a more efficient home, yes.
Yes.
Behavior is key.
Yes, but it gives them the ability to
They have the ability,
protect
yes.
themselves from rising costs.
Correct.
And so each of the core build plans in the IRP adds more gas to Dominion's resource mix, correct?
I wouldn't want to speak to the resource plan.
But you're
I
aware
would-
generally of
yes,
the broad plan.
generally.
And so wouldn't you agree that with recent fuel increases and also in an inflationary environment, it's more important than ever, really, for the company to help customers access bill savings through efficiency improvements in their homes?
For a select number of customers, yes, I think it's important to offer DSM energy efficiency programs. There are also customers that have no interest in energy efficiency at all, and they also pay for the DSM program. So there has to be a balance.
Okay. Now, did you know that the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, passed more than a year ago, offers new and expanded tax credits and rebates for energy efficiency improvements?
I am aware of them, yes.
Okay, so you're aware that the tax credits currently available can allow families to claim up to $1,200 in credit each year for adding insulation or installing more efficient windows or doors.
I know some of the eligibility that will be available to customers. How that will come to South Carolina, I don't think we know the terms for that yet. But yes, I do know that it looks like South Carolina residents will have those available.
Well, those are tax credits. Those are already available, aren't
The
they?
tax credits, okay.
And then it sounds like you're also aware that the White House has allocated South Carolina more than $68 million under the Home Energy Performance-Based Whole House Rebate Program and another $68 million under the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program. So there's also some money coming to the state.
Mm-hmm.
And those may not be available yet, but once they are, those rebate funds can offset potentially 100% of upfront costs for new, more efficient appliances. Isn't that right for low-income customers?
Mm-hmm.
You need to say yes or no, please.
Yes, yes,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Now, reducing or eliminating upfront costs entirely is especially important for low to moderate income households that may not otherwise be able to afford this more efficient equipment in the first place, despite the long-term potential energy savings those new appliances could provide, right?
So could you repeat that question?
Yes, of course. the possibility of being able to reduce or completely eliminate upfront costs on some of these more efficient appliances is especially important for low-income customers for whom that upfront cost may be prohibitive, but would still benefit from those longer-term energy savings, correct?
I would agree, yes.
And isn't it possible that customers will be able to combine these federal rebate dollars with some of the incentives offered under the utility efficiency programs?
I don't think we know that yet, but I could make an assumption that it is likely that they would be able to.
Okay.
I will also would like to say that rising cost of HVAC units and insulation have also caused those prices have changed during COVID due to supply chain issues and the cost to install those things. So those rebates are really needed for customers right now.
And the possibility of being able to combine federal and utility rebates might be more important than ever, right?
Yes. Yep.
So in short, taking advantage of these new incentives could certainly help Dominion customers in the coming years.
Absolutely. Yep.
Now, Mr. Gravatt recommends that the Commission require Dominion to develop and implement an action plan to support all customers' participation in these opportunities under the IRA, such as by helping customers understand which measures qualify for the IRA rebates and tax credits, helping customers to find a contractor to make that improvement, and helping customers understand sort of the application criteria. Are you aware of that recommendation?
I am.
And do you ever compare notes with other utilities in the state about how to help customers access energy efficiency improvements or how to engage new customers in utility programs?
We do. We collaborate with other utilities. We call other utilities that our program managers do. I personally have not called anyone recently, but we do collaborate with other utilities and go to conferences and meet with other utilities.
So are you aware then that another South Carolina utility, Duke Energy Progress, has committed to developing an action plan to help its income qualified and customers at large understand which measures qualify for IRA rebates and tax incentives?
Not specifically, but it would not surprise me.
Okay. So it sounds like you may not be aware that Duke Energy in its 2023 IRP describes a plan to become the go-to place for customers to learn more about these opportunities.
Yes, and we in our advisory group have also agreed that we will serve as a source of information for the IRA rebates. We've mentioned that in our advisory group that we will provide information to contractors and customers and market that information to customers. We've agreed to do that. We have not made a formal action plan to do that, but we've mentioned that several times in our advisory group.
In the efficiency advisory group.
We've mentioned it several times that we will provide that information to our customers and contractors too. We have a fairly large group of contractors that we communicate with on a regular basis.
So it sounds like let me back up for a little. But just to be clear, there's nothing in this IRP filing that describes any sort of plan to help customers access these opportunities, is there?
No.
And do you think Dominion would be able to provide like a more formal action plan, maybe in the 2024 update?
So currently, and it's part of the short-term
Madam
action
Chairman,
plan.
I would object to this line of questions. This is an IRP proceeding. It's not a DSM proceeding. The DSM is information that is put into the IRP as an input. There will be proceedings around the DSM plan. There'll be proceedings to adopt programs. I think this line of questioning is assuming that this is a DSM proceeding, and it's a planning proceeding, not a DSM proceeding. So I'd object to those questions on the balance of relevancy.
If I may, the Commission has to require consumer affordability as one of the factors that goes into its reasonable and prudent determination under Act 62. I'm just wrapping up right now, but whether customers have access to cost-saving opportunities, really unprecedented saving opportunities, is relevant to a plan that
I'm going to overrule the objection and you'll wrap it up.
Yes. Where am I? Now, give me 1 second. Now, so you acknowledged earlier that it was more important than ever for the company to help customers access bill savings through efficiency improvements, correct?
I think it's important for customers that are interested in learning to save, yes.
Okay, and you agree that without utility assistance and engagement, it may be difficult for some ratepayers to take full advantage of these incentives. It sounds like you were acknowledging that when you were discussing your plans through the advisory group.
Yes, yes. I think we can play a role in to help customers access information.
Okay, and as the company begins to develop its 5-year program plan, wouldn't it make sense for the company to identify opportunities where federal and utility incentives could be combined to make efficiency measures more accessible to customers?
So you just touched on what I was going to answer. So we are in the process of having program planning sessions with the advisory group. And we are one by one walking through each program and taking input from the advisory group members on improvement and marketing techniques for each program. And we have not touched on the heating and cooling program yet. So this would be a perfect topic for that advisory group meeting.
Okay, so given the steps it sounds like you've taken, would you be open to committing to make a more formal action plan to become a go-to place for customers to learn about these IRA opportunities and understand how they might qualify for them?
I think we've already committed to that. I think we've already had that discussion in the Energy Efficiency Advisor Group. I think we've already said that we will serve that role. We've got it in documented meeting notes with our Energy Efficiency Advisor Group.
Have you informed customers directly about this role? Would you be open to developing a more formal outreach?
Absolutely, but the IRA funds in our state have not been determined how they will be spent. And so the information is not available to share with customers yet.
Well, they're coming. I think they're expected for next year, so that gives you time to plan,
Yes.
doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And to have a plan in place for when they are available.
Yes.
Okay. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Sasiba?
Chair Belson, no questions for this witness.
Thank you. Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions before us. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for this witness? Commissioner Carolee Williams?
Thank you, Chair Belzer. We're trying a new technique so that I can stay near my microphone and be heard. Thank you for being here and for your testimony. Thank you. Does Dominion have a consultant entity that helps you all to implement your EE programs?
It varies by program. So we have ICF helps us with the commercial programs. We have Honeywell that assists us with our multifamily and low-income program. HVAC we manage in-house, but we have ICF that consults and does contractor training, but we manage the rebate and the program internally and have our own in-house team. Our home energy checkup program is run internally by a group of BPI certified representatives that work for the Dominion employees. But then we have a contractor that does our Tier 2 Home Energy Checkup Plus program. Then our online store is run by AMCG. And appliance recycling, we currently have a vendor. It's a tricky one. ARCA is our vendor right now. So it's all over it's not one. We don't use turnkey one vendor. As the program is in its 13th year, we've expanded.
Do you feel like ICF doing this analysis for you and also being your commercial
consultant,
is that Is that a win-win, or is it concerning that you're learning from somebody who's already in-house?
They're two completely separate teams. So the ICF planning team is in another state in a completely different team, and then the ICF team that manages our business or small business program, they're actually here, boots on the ground, a team that is assembled in Columbia and in Charleston. So they go door to door for the small business program, but they also help with, so they really are separate teams. You know, they may know that they work for the same company, but they're completely different operations.
Are you aware of anybody nationally that does an analysis of energy efficiency on a state-by-state basis?
ACDD does look at other states across the board and compares states against each other. Their eSource is another. It's several companies. Well, I don't know if they do a state report, but there are other places where you can look up data how other utilities are doing. But I would say there is an ACEEE report.
And do you know how South Carolina's doing on the ACEEE?
I don't know our exact rating, but the Southeast in general, including South Carolina, is not high.
Why?
You know, South Carolina is different from other service territories. Our customers are different. I can only speak to DESC customers, of course. You know, our low-hanging fruit in South Carolina was lighting. And, you know, in the first few years of our programs, this is our 13th program year, and LED lighting, I mean, we sold, you know, from the first couple of program years, you know, now we've sold over 8 million LED incentive and sold over 8 million LED bulbs through our programs. And that is now gone. So our customers are different here. We have a large percentage of air source heat pumps here compared to other service territories, and a large percentage of electric water heaters compared to other service territories. So that makes us unique compared to, so a lot of other service territories are trying or pushing electrification and trying to get customers to move to air source heat pumps. We have about 56% of customers that already have heat pumps, air source heat pumps. So, you know, that makes us unique. Our building codes have not changed, evolved quite as quickly as other areas. But really, our builders have built higher than code. So we are seeing changes in the building industry that they've built higher to codes, but our codes have not changed. So that makes us a little bit different. We do have certain customers that are not interested in participating in DSM, and then we have some that are highly engaged. It really is. We do have unique situation in South Carolina compared to others. But it does come down to changing behaviors. Now we're at trickier measures. They're either more invasive measures or behavioral changes have to be made because the low-hanging fruit is gone in South Carolina. So it's going to be harder. You're going to see other utilities are going to struggle with that too now that lighting is gone, though. It's going to be harder. We will not be the only utility that has a hard time with DSM.
I used to hear that mobile homes were a big impact on what was possible within our state, and because of the number of them and I know you're just speaking from the Dominion Territory area, but is that still a factor, or as housing ages, has that become less of a factor?
We do have a certain percent. The majority of our customers are single-family homes, but I wish I could tell you the exact number in the market study, but it's in the high teens that we have mobile homes in our service territory. But older mobile homes do use do use a lot of energy. And we specifically have a low income program that targets high using mobile homes for that specific reason. When we are doing our low income neighborhood program sweep, we go through and look at the mobile homes and find the ones that are the highest energy users, and we do full weatherization on those. So just through the most recent advisory group meetings, and we're doing the DSM action plan, we agreed to increase the number of those mobile homes, because that is certainly a need in our service territory.
I hope somebody else has questions, because I've got one for you and I just can't find it again in my brain. So I anticipate.
I understand that.
I anticipate asking another one, but it's not on the tip of my tongue. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Justin Williams.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, ma'am, for being here today.
Thank you.
I just want to unpack a statement you made earlier, and hopefully I don't butcher the statement, but it was something to the effect of you haven't seen, or I guess in theory, the DSM programs, EE programs should reduce the need for utilities to seek new generation or construct new generation, but you don't know if you necessarily have seen that. Could you just unpack that for me a little bit?
So the amount of DSM, our most significant year was in PY4. The programs were really up and running strong. And even at that point, we were unable to get to, say, 1% of retail sales, even in that year. And that was strong lighting, residential customers, and that was our highest energy savings year. And so even at that level, with our highest level, and now we certainly would have a hard time achieving that going forward. The tricky thing about DSM is not dispatchable. So I can't see where it could replace that's the tricky thing with DSM. Some of the measures, like HVAC, HVAC measure is a permanent change on the system. But a lot of the forecast that's going forward involves, a lot of behavioral programs. And so that's why I don't feel like what we have in DSM going forward would actually reduce our load. It would reduce our load, and it helps the system, but I don't think it would reduce the need for a plant going forward, because it's DSM as it is not dispatchable. It's all based on customer behavior. Now, we do have opportunity for demand response, and we're investigating that, and that potentially is a dispatchable load. But the DSM programs as they're presented today are not dispatchable. I think that's what I meant behind that statement. I know that's what I meant, not I think. That is what I meant behind that statement.
Thank you for that. So I grew up in South Carolina, rural South Carolina, and I think I pick up what you're putting down about South Carolina is different. I mean, do you think that it's possible that DSM programs, or your DSM program, has reached a point where it's peaked or maybe has run its course?
I've been asked that question since DSM started, to be quite honest. There is still opportunity for customers. That's a tricky question because I'm manager of the department. But overall, but I'm going to be honest. Give you a very honest answer based on the market study. 58% of our customers, it just overall, are concerned about energy savings. 58% in the market study said they were concerned. But then that means that the other half are not necessarily concerned about it. So for those 58%, I think we should have a program or option for them to educate them on how they could save. Customers in our service territory are not used to the information from AMI and how much they could learn from our HER program. So our Home Energy Reports program relaunched in October of 2021. We now have 391,000 customers. And though you would think that, October of 2022, we had at the end of October 2022 or last year, program year, we had 290. Now we have 390,000 customers. That's a lot of customers. But an HER behavioral program where you're constantly providing information, it just takes a long time to ramp that information up. Our customers are not used to us constantly giving that AMI data and the HER reports. And I do think there's an opportunity for education there. A lot of the information is the thermostat settings, and customers don't realize it's in their control right now. The next option is equipment and air sealing and insulation, which is more expensive and invasive. So if we can get them to do the measures like adjusting their thermostat, getting them the education, I do think there's still opportunity. So I'm not convinced that it's over. But you have to understand I am a little biased. I'm passionate about our programs because I've been to our low-income programs. We just held a kickoff a month or so ago in Haskell Heights, and it's an important program to people in those communities. So I'm passionate about the program. I might be the wrong person to ask.
Well, I disagree with that. I think you're absolutely the right person to ask, especially with the candor that you've demonstrated here and the willingness to admit you say it's bias. I wouldn't call it bias. You know more than we know. And so I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Shelton, I too appreciate candor and just straightforward, honest answer. And I'm assuming you've been here all day.
I have.
And you heard the questions relative to load forecast projections, that's the 1%. And I've also heard in this hearing and previous hearings, educational seminars that new appliances, HVAC, lights, and so on are more energy efficient in the last decade. And I think even your IFC study, it indicated that, low 0.46%, 0.51%, medium 0.74%, that can be reasonably achieved according to your study as far as
correct
energy efficiency goes. And when I think about these things, and I think a lot about these things because I've asked a lot about them through the course of time in various and sundry hearings. And while I know this is not a EEDSM hearing, it is part of the IRP.
Correct.
And when I think about these things, I also, answer this. The utility recovers program cost, some portion of incentives, and net lost revenue for these, correct?
That is correct.
And I saw something in the IRP that showed an estimated program cost, and I can't remember if it was total or annual. I probably should have had it laying here in front of me. I apologize for that. Do you know what the total cost of all of those recovery mechanisms are in a year?
So I know what we spent last year, if that's helpful to know.
It's more than I have now.
Yeah, so we spent around $27 million last year to provide the programs.
That's the program cost.
Yep, program cost. And that the majority of that was customer rebates or direct services back to customers. We classify expenses back into incentives and what we call non-incentives, which non-incentives typically are administrative or implementation costs that we pay to the contractors.
So make sure I understand. So in that 27 million is Dominion's portion of the incentive and net loss revenue included in that number?
No, that I don't have the DSM complete rider in front of me to tell you that, but that's another piece of it. The net loss revenue is another piece. That's the energy savings. And that includes the true up from PY11 and the forecast for PY12 and PY13 would make up the net loss revenues, the megawatt hours for those 3 years.
Do you know who would have that information or where that information?
Alan Rooks would. I mean, I could get it for you.
No.
Yeah. I didn't bring the DSM rider with me.
I understand. Those are the things that, how's it calculated? How do you determine that? Those are the things that interest me. Given the opportunity, it'd be wonderful for someone at the utility to explain that to me. I look forward to that next opportunity we have. But where I do have a concern, thinking about all these things, is, from the demand response side, it makes all the sense in the world to me, because it's time of use rates and things like that that really only the utility can do, in my view. I mean, does that make sense?
Yes.
And when I think about, DSM, energy efficiency, whatever you want to call it, if I need to go buy a dishwasher or a refrigerator, light bulbs, HVAC unit, whatever breaks or I need to replace, I'm pretty much going to have to go replace it with something more energy efficient than 10 or 20 years ago. Is that a true statement?
That is, and that's essentially why we don't provide appliance rebates. But we do provide for like HVAC units. You can buy a code level HVAC unit, not an Energy Star unit. But for appliance or refrigerator, primarily what you'll find is Energy Star. If you go into a store, and they're so much more efficient. A refrigerator, for example, is so much more efficient than they used to be.
Well, that's kind of my understanding too, and that's kind of what I've heard repeatedly in various and sundry hearings, and
that's correct.
Even some training that we had. And the HVAC, now I know, the higher the SEER, the more efficient, the more expensive, and good God, have those things gone up. But most folks that can afford it are going to buy it whether you give them incentive or not. Is that a true statement or not a true statement?
It does happen. Sometimes we influence some customers, and some customers are going to do it on their own. And ODC through EM&V evaluates that. We get credit if I have the net to gross, and I'm pretty close. It's around 65% of the net to gross on HVAC is about 65%. We influence about 65% of the customers that participate in the program.
Well, I guess what I'm hearing and trying to get to is I don't know anyone that's opposed to energy efficiency or demand side management, demand response. But along the, I guess, lines of question that Commissioner Jay Williams had is that there comes a point as to, do we need to continue doing this or doing it this way? And having read the study, and I did read your study, there are things that make sense and that only the utility can do. And there are other things that may sound cool, but is it costing the customer more than it's worth? Now, I know it goes through these tests, which one day I want somebody to explain how those work too. Because everything involves inputs or assumptions, correct?
Correct.
Assumptions are still assumptions. So I guess along the lines of Commissioner Jay Williams, Dominion looking at considering all the time, what do we need to stop doing really doesn't make sense, and what makes the most sense, and what do we need to keep doing or add, such as, I think, some of the things you said in your IFC study. Is that your role?
Yes. And I just brought this up to our advisory group. We have an appliance recycling program. At some point, and our EM&V provider has brought it up, and I've brought it up to our advisory group. There will be a point where we will not have that program anymore. You know, we want to continue. Customers love the program. They love to be able to recycle their refrigerator. But eventually, we will be recycling newer and newer refrigerators, not a refrigerator made prior to 1990. And then you really are only you're only recycling a primary unit that was in the home, not a secondary unit that was in somebody's garage or carport, which is really what we want to remove. So there is a life to a program. We don't know what that life is, you know, but I you know, it happened to make it in this next model, but I actually brought that up at the last advisory group because it was in we did the DSM, the energy efficiency, part of the short-term action plan was to have the advisory group review the plan with them and discuss that program and go through marketing and everything for that program. And I've clearly brought it up to them. This is an issue. This program may not make it 5 more years, even if it's approved in the next plan. I mean, we have to have these discussions. It is a program that may not make it 5 more years. It's reality for some programs.
That's good. Good you guys have
Yeah.
this committee. Good you have these discussions because I've observed that people tend to wig out when I say things like, do we need all these programs and this stuff? Because I think the good news is, it sounds to me, is that as a society, as a country, we have worked our way toward, like the water saving devices I mentioned earlier, toward a more ubiquitous nature of energy efficient devices rather than trying to force a square peg into a round hole. Let's just do what makes sense and don't cost any more than it needs to. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
We can keep doing that, keep working on it, and I hope somewhere down the road someone will help me understand these things better and bring this information. Thank you, Ms. Shelton.
You're welcome.
Ms. Shelton, if I'm asking questions which need to go to the next witness, just feel free to punt to him.
Okay.
So, I think I recall from the IRP that AMI deployment has been delayed because of supply chain issues.
That is correct.
Okay. But it's expected to be completed in 2024. Is that correct?
That's
Does that
correct.
sound right? And I think that what do you know what is going to take place between now and completion of the rollout? Are y'all gathering data to assist in demand response activities or programs?
I can actually speak to that because that does fall. Demand response is going to fall under DSM. So
it's going to fall under DSM?
It will. Demand response and DSM, it will fall under
Okay.
DSM. So we have hired a demand response program manager, and we have had our first internal stakeholder kickoff meeting with several different areas in the company. one meeting. We've had one meeting to go through the results of the ICF demand response study and start talking internally about what would be the most appropriate program to pick for our customers. We're going to start benchmarking other utilities and see what programs they offer. So that was just brought up that we're going to start doing that. We have not started, but our program manager is working on that right now. So we'll review the programs, the residential programs, critical peak pricing, peak time rebate, smart thermostat, and time of use. There's also a guidehouse study that is not under DSM. That's being handled by the rate department. So the rate department has guidehouse doing that study, but essentially they will develop a rate. But a rate for time of use is just that. It's a rate. But if you want customers to participate, you would ideally develop it into a program, a DSM program, market it and design it, and the marketing and education and implement it through DSM or through the DSM department, because as a program.
And I kind of want to come back to the IRP. Is it too much of an oversimplification to say that the demand response is more? It's those programs will be controlled by the utility, like with the smart thermostat. The utility could turn off an air conditioning at a peak time, whereas DSM might be more in the control of the customer.
I have not thought of it that way. When I think of...
I reckon where I'm coming from is with the demand response. I mean, it does include customer involvement, but most of the programs I'm seeing is that there is some control by the utility where the utility can cut off or up the thermostat maybe at a peak time. Maybe not cut the customer off, but I think more of on DSM is that a lot of what the customer is doing on their side. I mean, they have to agree to the demand response side. Maybe that's an oversimplification on my part.
There are programs like that. There's also peak time rebates where we incentivize customers during certain events, and they can participate or not participate. And so that's kind of a combination of both. So they could participate and reduce their usage during a certain time or choose not to.
But all of those programs are on the table as far as consideration of what's going to go into demand response.
Everything's being reviewed.
But really, is there much demand response that can be done until you get the AMI data?
Correct.
Okay.
We are waiting. We're deciding on the programs and reviewing the AMI data now, and we have not made a final decision. Then we'd also, once we get to a certain point, we'd like to take that to the advisory group for input as well. So we're still in the, very, very early stages of making a final decision of where we will go forward.
And then the percentages that the utility hopes to achieve based on the study of the low, medium, and high, and y'all are using the medium as the reference point. What was that, 0.47%?
4.74, I think, is the time of use.
But that's what's being hoped for demand response, those programs, not the DSM programs that are already being in existence.
They're separate. That's correct.
Okay.
They're separate.
I think that's all I have. Thank you. Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. You could tell by my reaction it was AMI that I wanted to get back to, and my colleagues have asked that really well. I think the only other thing I wanted to ask was, as AMI is completed, is there a vision, and you might not be the right person for this question, but where everybody is going to have data that may influence their choices? Or would that fall under the demand response and DMS program that you were just talking about?
So the AMI offering is in another area, but my understanding through customer service is everyone that has an AMI meter will have options to view their data.
I'm looking forward to that day personally. What is HER?
Oh, home injury reports.
Okay.
I apologize. I use
And-
acronyms without thinking.
What did you just say?
I use acronyms without thinking sometimes in
Okay.
DSM.
You talked earlier about commercial demand response programs. In that evaluation, is there any evaluation of reconsidering the opt-out program at this point?
It was not.
Okay.
No, it was not.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
I did have one clarification. In your testimony, you spoke about the advisory group a couple of times, but I felt like maybe there were two different advisory groups, one being the Energy Efficiency Advisory Group and one perhaps being the advisory or stakeholder group dealing with the development of the IRP. Am I incorrect on that?
There are two advisory group members. There's an IRP. When I was speaking, I primarily was talking about the Energy Efficiency Advisory Group. However, I presented and attended the majority of the IRP. I presented, I think, twice, presented potential study updates to the IRP group in the last year. And then I attend the IRP stakeholder group in case questions arise.
But in your testimony, you were basically referring to the Energy Efficiency Advisory Group.
Correct.
Thank you for that clarification.
Correct.
Commissioners, anything further? Mr. Ziegler?
Chair Belcher, no redirect.
Thank you. Ms. Shelton, thank you for your testimony this afternoon. You may stand down. Do we want to go ahead with your next witness?
The company's happy to proceed.
Let's
I believe
keep
we'll be next calling Andrew Durkee, who will be testifying virtually.
virtually, okay? We may not
and
finish
this-
today, but we can get a good start. How about that?
Perfect.
Thank
See
you.
what we can get going.
Good afternoon, Mr. Durkee.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Would you please raise your right hand and the court reporter will swear you in?
Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Please state your name for the record.
Andrew Durkee.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by ICF Resources LLC. I'm a director of flexible load management and energy markets analytics.
And Mr. Durkee, have you prepared a cause to be prepared under your supervision and direction, written direct testimony of 31 pages that has been pre-filed in the present docket?
Yes, I have.
And are there any corrections to that pre-filed direct testimony?
No, there are not.
If I were to ask you the questions contained in that testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belcher, I would move Andrew Durkee's direct pre-filed testimony into the record at this time.
Mr. Durkee's pre-filed direct testimony will be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
And Mr. Durkee, I believe there is one exhibit to your testimony, ADM 1, which is the 2023 DSM potential study prepared by ICF. Is that correct?
Yes, with one exception. I think you said ADM1 and it's AMD.
AMD, excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Very good. With that correction, are there any corrections to the exhibit that need to be made at this point?
No, they're not.
Chair Belcher, I'd move exhibit AMD number 1 into the record at this time.
Exhibit AMD 1 will be marked for identification as hearing Exhibit 9 and received into the evidence of this case.
Mr. Durkee, have you prepared a summary of your direct pre-filed testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please deliver that to the commission and the parties?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to provide an overview of ICF's process and analysis in conducting the 2023 DSM Potential Study. The primary objectives of the 2023 DSM Potential Study were to, 1, evaluate technical, economic, achievable, and maximum achievable potential for the DSM programs in DESC's service territory, looking at a broad range of possible programs and measures. 2, calculate the reductions in sales that could be achieved by DSM programs achieving technical, economic, achievable, and maximum achievable potentials and the associated cost of those programs. 3, identify and quantify the opportunities for expanded demand response, or DR programs, to reduce winter peak demand on DESC's system as a part of DESC's DSM programs. 4, determine whether DSM programs achieving a 1%, 1.25%, 1.5%, 1.75%, or 2% reduction in energy sales were achievable and cost-effective in DESC's service territory, as required by the South Carolina Public Service Commission, or the Commission, in Order Number 2020-832. 5, provide the inputs regarding DSM program results and costs necessary for DESC to complete its 2023 Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP. And 6, meet all requirements of the Commission orders and directives in fulfilling these goals. In addition to these primary objectives, ICF undertook this study under a stakeholder process guided by principles of transparency and inclusiveness. The potential study defined the study goals of technical potential, economic potential, achievable potential, and maximum achievable potential using EPA definitions of those terms, which were discussed with stakeholders and agreed to by them through the Energy Efficiency Advisory Group. Technical potential is the theoretical maximum amount of energy use that could be displaced by efficiency, disregarding all non-engineering constraints, such as cost effectiveness and the willingness of end users to adopt the energy efficiency measures. Economic potential is the subset of technical potential that is economically cost-effective as compared to the conventional supply-side energy resources. Achievable potential is a subset of economic potential. It is the energy savings that could be realistically achieved given real-world constraints, including market and programmatic barriers. Maximum achievable potential is the amount of energy use that energy efficiency can realistically be expected to displace, assuming the most aggressive program scenario possible. Again, these are the EPA definitions. Calculating the technical and economic potential are screening steps in the process for determining achievable DSM levels. Technical and economic potential do not account for any limitations on customer willingness to participate in programs or the cost or practical limitations in delivering these programs. They only show conceptually the maximum number of potential measures that exist for a given service territory, which is technical potential and the maximum number of those measures that would be economic, assuming full customer participation and no cost of incentives or non-incentive program costs, economic potential. For example, if there are 100,000 low-efficiency HVAC units in a service territory that could be replaced with higher efficiency units, replacing all 100,000 units would define the technical potential. If half of those units were of such low efficiency that the energy savings from the higher efficient unit would pay for its additional cost over time, then the economic potential would reflect replacing 50,000 units. But not all of those 50,000 customers will be interested in replacing their units. And it will cost money to convince those who can be convinced that they should. Only when those factors are considered do you begin to evaluate achievable potential. So technical and economic potential are not intended to represent results that can be accomplished in the real world. In total, ICF analyzed 218 energy efficiency, or EE, measure types and 1,997 measure permutations, or an application of a measure in a specific building type for this potential study. Full descriptions of each measure type and permutation appear in Appendix A of the potential study, along with each measure's cost effectiveness results. The results across the 15-year time frame of the technical and economic analysis show an average annual reduction in sales using 2021 sales as a baseline of 2.72% for the technical potential and 2.19% for the economic potential. The achievable scenarios, including low, medium, and maximum scenarios, are presented at the program level. Total program costs were estimated based on a combination of DESC's prior experience and the experience of other utilities implementing similar programs, adjusted as necessary to reflect the scale and other unique characteristics of DESC's programs. Participation rates were developed using various methods, which are described in the study, and including consideration of free ridership, which is an estimation of program participants who would have taken the energy efficient action even in the absence of the program, and who therefore provide no net benefit. For all measures and programs that are currently offered by DESC, free ridership was estimated based on actual DESC evaluation, measurement, and verification results as verified by third-party evaluators annually. Free ridership for new measure types and programs was estimated by ICF based on program implementation experience in South Carolina and other jurisdictions. ICF evaluated program cost effectiveness using the same cost effectiveness testing methodology previously approved by this commission. The cost effectiveness analysis showed all residential and non-residential programs or program tiers are cost effective across scenarios except for the home energy checkup tier 2. The resulting energy savings for the forecasted year 2024 from the achievable scenarios were an annual incremental reduction in gross sales of 0.74% for the high case, 0.51% for the medium case, and 0.46% for the low case at the gross level, which does not account for free ridership. In order number 2020-832, the Commission directed DESC to perform a full evaluation of the cost effectiveness and achievability of DSM portfolios, reaching annual energy sales reduction levels of 1%, 1.25%, 1.5%, 1.75%, and 2%. ICF's bottom-up analysis created a DSM portfolio for DESC that included all measures that were shown to be cost-effective. It showed that the achievable reduction in energy consumption on DES systems varied between 0.74% and 0.46% based on reasonable and achievable rates of customer participation as established from multiple sources. The 1%, 1.25%, 1.5%, 1.75%, and 2% incremental annual savings scenarios require ICF to assume that DESC implements measures and/or programs that are not cost-effective and achieves customer acceptance levels that are not supportable, which would violate the Commission's directive that the analysis determine if such levels are achievable and cost-effective. Given this, ICF determined that the additional scenarios are not achievable, but did take extra steps to model the cost-effectiveness of these theoretical scenarios in order to comply with the order. However, even where this theoretical analysis shows a program to be cost-effective at a higher level of savings, achieving that level of savings may be impossible because it would require customer participation at levels that are not supportable based on data from DESC's service territory. Key findings from the 2023 DSM potential study are as follows. 1. In the medium case, annual incremental savings in 2024 represent 0.51% of 2021 sales gross of free riders, and these savings decrease slightly throughout the study period as some of the opportunity for energy efficiency is reduced. Savings in the high case are about 44% higher in 2024, representing 0.74% of 2021 sales. 2. The results of the potential study reflect the reality that a 1% reduction in sales is not achievable. The Commission required scenarios represent a minimum 77% increase above the high achievable potential case. These scenarios also require participation that is beyond the maximum that can be reasonably achieved through DESC's DSM programs. These scenarios have been evaluated, and while some of the theoretical program forecasts are cost-effective, none of them are reasonable or achievable. As part of the study, ICF also completed a comprehensive evaluation of DR programs for both residential and commercial customers, with an emphasis on decreasing the winter peak. The analysis was presented by sector and bundles, where the forecasted included opt-in as compared to opt-out enrollment. At a high level, the DR assessment consisted of 3 main steps. 1, program identification, including development of a comprehensive list of DR program types currently implemented in U.S. markets. 2, program modeling using data such as implementation costs, market sizes, and participation criteria. ICF relied on primary data concerning DESC's service territory and customer base was relied upon when available. 3, program assessment, including producing peak reduction, estimation, and cost effectiveness information for 3 scenarios, reference, low, and high. Key findings from the DR assessment for opt-in programs are as follows. 1, in the reference case, DR programs, including existing programs, have the potential to shave approximately 10% of the peak load by 2037. This number goes up to 13% in the high case and can dip down to 9% in the low case. The corresponding megawatt savings in 2037 are 486 megawatts, 653 megawatts, and 432 megawatts for the reference high and low cases. 2, existing programs, interruptible and backup generation, contribute to 47% of the total savings in 2037. In 2037, 39% of savings are achieved from the interruptible program, and 8% of savings are achieved from the backup generation program in the reference case. 3, among the new programs, Smart Thermostat, TOU, and peak time rebates are the highest contributors. In 2037, in the reference case, these 3 programs contribute to 15%, 13%, and 9% of the total savings estimated from the DR programs. 4, Smart Thermostats contribute 34% of the overall residential savings, followed by 28% from the TOU residential program. In the reference case, the contributions from the other programs, peak time rebate, critical peak pricing, and demand rate, stand at 19%, 12%, and 7% respectively. 5, interruptible program contributes 72% of the total C&I savings, followed by the backup generation program that contributes 15%. All the other programs have single-digit percentage contributions, adding up to 13%. 6, the portfolio level cost effectiveness, or the TRC, over a 15-year time period is 7.9. In all sectors, all programs except the real-time pricing have TRC benefit cost ratios greater than 1 in all cases. In conclusion, it is my opinion that the potential study provides a fair and accurate representation of both achievable and cost-effective potential for DSM programs in DESC's service territory. The potential study performed is grounded in analytics and data that is based on DESC's service territory and includes the most up-to-date information from both a market assessment and customers' willingness to participate in DSM programs, as well as evaluation results. Further, the process of conducting the potential study allowed for a robust stakeholder engagement process. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Durkee. Have you also prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision and direction certain rebuttal testimony of 25 pages, which has been filed in this docket?
Yes, sorry.
Are there any corrections to that pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No.
If I were to ask you the questions contained in that testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belser, I would move into the record the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Durkee.
Mr. Durkee's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
And Mr. Durkee, I understand there are no exhibits to that testimony. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Durkee, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
Would you please deliver that to the commission and the parties?
Absolutely. Thank you. The purpose of my rebuttal testimony is to respond to certain assertions and recommendations of witness Jim Gravatt on behalf of CCL and SACE and the Sierra Club. Witness Gravatt claims that the DESC 2023 DSM potential study ignores the benefits of energy efficiency, ignores the results achieved in other jurisdictions, and did not take seriously the Commission's directive in Order 2021-429 to determine if reasonable, cost-effective, and achievable DSM plans can be implemented in DESC's service territory that achieve reduction in sales of between 1% and 2% annually. Each of these claims is inaccurate and supported with assertions and analysis that are equally inaccurate. In preparing the 2023 DSM potential study, ICF followed best practices nationwide for determining the potential for generating verifiable DSM savings. Its work was informed by extensive knowledge of what is being achieved today in more than 200 programs that ICF implements for over 60 utilities in 26 states, as well as specific knowledge of DESC's service territory and customer base and customers' real-world responsiveness and participation rates as independently verified by the evaluation, measurement, and verification consultant for DESC's programs, who also prepared a detailed market study of the service territory for this study. Witness Gravatt attacks the 2023 DSM potential study, claiming that ICF should have assumed that savings in the 1% to 2% were reasonable, cost-effective, and achievable, and then created DSM plans to achieve them, regardless of their ability to meet these standards. Instead of biasing the 2023 DSM potential study by basing it on preconceived notions of what is achievable, ICF used a bottom-up approach, which is a best practice in DSM planning, to avoid subjectivity and bias. In consultation with stakeholders, ICF reviewed each of the thousands of programs and measures in its nationwide database and identified all that would be cost-effective in DESC's service territory, given the electric rates and housing, building, equipment, and lighting stock in that service territory, and EM&V results from South Carolina and nationally. It then forecasted DSM savings that could be generated from these programs. This bottom-up analysis showed that savings of 1% or more are not reasonable or achievable in DESC's territory. This was not a theoretical exercise, as Witness Gravatt claims, but the creation of a DSM potential study based on sound methodology, facts, and hard data. The assertion that ICF performed the analysis for the commission-required scenarios with a preconception that they were unrealistic is categorically false. In response to the commission directive, ICF did create a suite of DSM programs to show what would be required to meet a 1% savings as a hypothetical, because it could only be created by assuming participation rates which were not supportable in DESC's service territory, making the plan unreasonable and unachievable. While Witness Gravatt claims DESC reached a flawed conclusion, DESC's conclusion is, in fact, the only conclusion that one could logically reach. If the realistically achievable maximum achievable scenario is lower than the commission-required scenarios, it is not possible for the commission-required scenarios to be realistically achievable. The method and assumptions Witness Gravatt used to develop his recommended savings levels are flawed and biased at best, especially when his recommendations assume DSM results at a level many times higher than the DSM potential study analysis shows, based on a bottom-up, iterative, and unbiased approach. Using program savings levels from the commission-required scenarios, Witness Gravatt creates a new portfolio, picking the highest savings from each of the programs that are identified as hypothetically cost-effective in the commission-required analyses, without considering the fact that the EM&V and other data indicate that savings at these levels are not achievable. He then adds these programs together to create his recommendation. He ignores the fact that these commission-required scenarios are clearly stated to be hypothetical, and cost-effective estimation for programs under it was only performed in compliance with commission directives. This data Witness Gravatt used should not be used for estimation or formulation for any kind of recommended savings targets. I also respond to a number of specific challenges Witness Gravatt raises. One, the achievable potential presented in the DSM potential study is not unrealistically low, and the medium DSM case does not simply maintain the status quo. The medium DSM case shows a 22% increase in savings over program year 9, which is the last full evaluated year that was not affected by the pandemic. The proposed expansions and modifications to the programs are extensive and was provided previously in Table 6 of the DSM potential study. The DSM potential study does not assume that the results, I apologize. Number two, the DSM potential study does not assume that results from the latest evaluated program years would remain steady over the next 15 years, but results change throughout the 15-year period based on known information, such as lighting standard changes. Three, ICF and DESC consulted the stakeholder advisory group members extensively and allowed members to provide input into the methodology, list of programs and measures considered, and medium and maximum achievable scenarios based on an unbiased data analysis. All of the input during this development was considered, and the results of this analysis determined that the 1% to 2% DSM savings rates posited in Order 2021-429 were not reasonable or achievable. 4, the 2023 DSM potential study was based on all 18 plus sources of data and information listed in Table 2 of the DSM potential study, and was not only based on ICF program data and expert judgment and historical program savings, evaluation, and cost data, as witness Gravatt claims. 5, ICF considered utilities reporting higher levels of savings, and 12 out of the 28 utilities used for benchmarking reported savings over 1%. However, achieving these levels was dependent on several factors unique to their service territory and regulatory environment, including the ability to deliver residential lighting programs in a point of purchase retail setting, which will decrease in the future, the effectiveness of large behavioral programs, the lack of opt-out provisions, reporting savings at a gross first net level, how the sales baseline was set, how the states account for savings achieved outside of DSM program funding, customer acceptance levels in the service territory, program maturity, and other factors. These are all important variables, and witness Gravatt does not take any of these factors into account. 6, there are several reasons the Virginia Pathways Report, which witness Gravatt provided, cannot be used as justification for the Commission to find that higher level of savings are cost-effective, reasonable, and achievable compared to what is identified in the maximum achievable scenario. A, it does not consider whether utilities operated under a cost-effectiveness requirement. B, it cherry picks benchmarked utilities, only 1 out of the 12 could be considered Southeastern. C, all of the data is from 2018, a year when programs, which were able to, claim significant savings from residential lighting point-of-sale programs, and when the effects of mandated lighting and equipment efficiency standards did not limit DSM savings to the extent they are today. D, it includes utilities who count savings toward their percentage of sales goals but are not funded by the DSM programs. And E, it does not consider which, if any, of the utilities provided for benchmarking have an opt-out structure similar to DESC's. 7, while there are estimates and schedules of the amount of funds that will be dedicated to South Carolina for IRA rebates, there is still no plan for the method or criteria of disbursement in the state, including a timeline of when those funds would begin to be dispersed. How additional rebates will affect DSM programs is the subject of much debate in the industry. Rebates given outside DSM programs can reduce the savings generated by DSM programs, as some may argue that the attribution for those savings lie elsewhere. It is inappropriate to make assumptions about such disbursement. In summary, the criticisms that witness Gravatt raised against the 2023 DSM potential study are groundless, and the methodology and assumptions which witness Gravatt uses to develop his recommended savings levels are flawed and biased at best. He assumes a level of DSM results, which the DSM potential study analysis shows based on a bottom-up, iterative, and unbiased approach to be unreasonable and unachievable. This concludes my summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Chair Belzer, witness Durkee is available for cross-examination and questions from the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. I need to check with our chief clerk just a moment, if y'all would stand at ease. Do we have a good bit of cross-examination?
No questions from the Sierra Club.
Say CCL.
I do have cross-examination. It's probably 45 minutes,
Okay,
though.
that's fine. You just said that. We're gonna break for the evening. We will pick up with cross-examination. Mr. Durkee, since you're virtual, I don't know that I need to give you my standard warning about please don't discuss, you're under oath, please don't discuss your testimony with anyone or let anyone discuss it in your presence, but, and you're probably safe, but I don't want to leave you out. How about that?
Understood.
I do need to, let's get an idea about tomorrow since we have a witness on, but we have two witnesses that we need to take up. Do we need to take up the ORS witnesses first and then come back, or how can we do this? Any suggestions?
We're happy to do whatever makes most sense. What time was the chair thinking we would start?
We'll start at 9:30.
9:30. So if we have a 10 o'clock time certain, that's going to be very hard to.
Yeah. Is
get
that what,
anything done
did we have a
before
10 o'clock time certain, or?
No, there was not a time certain. It was just a day certain for them to,
All right.
for both.
Well, let's just finish up then and then move on. I think we can get that done.
I think we can accommodate that.
We just
Okay.
need to get through basically our three witnesses' testimony tomorrow.
All right, sir. And even if we have to go till 6 o'clock tomorrow night, or whatever, we'll do it. So,
Thank
okay,
you,
we'll resume with Mr. Durkee in the morning and proceed on to ORS and then come back. So appreciate y'all accommodating this schedule. And we will reconvene at 9:30 in the morning, and we are in recess until then. Have a good evening.